Chapter 984. Even though Li Yi's alcohol tolerance had increased significantly during this period of time, he was still no match for these old generals who valued alcohol as much as their lives. This was especially so when the few of them added up. After a round of toasting, he realized that he could not drink any more. Thankfully, his alcohol tolerance had increased, and so had his alcohol tolerance. When he was drunk, he would just sleep. He would not act like a hero when he was drunk, nor would he talk nonsense when he was drunk. He would also not forget what had happened when he woke up. Of course, when he was drunk with Mississippi Liu and Emingzu, there was no way of knowing what he had told Mississippi Liu and what he had promised Emingzu. My alcohol tolerance is too high. Old generals, please continue. I'll take my leave first. If he drank any more, he would be a little drunk. Li Yi wobbled and bade farewell to the few of them. With Fang's support, he walked out of the Shui manor. Seeing him walk out, old General Shui sighed, shook his head and said, "This child. He's a good child." Old General Ma revealed a gratified expression. It's the Jing Kingdom's fortune that His Majesty has such a confidant. Old General Shui suddenly picked up a wine jar and took a big gulp, scolding, "That bunch of trash. What do they know?" Old General Ma crushed the wine bowl in his hand and said fiercely, "After this, if anyone dares to cause any more trouble, no matter who they are, I'll skin them personally." The killing aura of an old general who had killed his way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood was extremely strong. The two servants of the Shui clan at the door shuddered and silently moved further away. After walking out of the Shui manor's door, the hazy look in Li Yi's eyes disappeared. Fang let go of him and asked, "Son-in-law, where should we go next?" "Go." Li Yi gave it some thought, and suddenly realized that there was no place in the entire capital that was worth him going to. He fell silent for a moment before saying, "Chen Clan's cloth shop." "All right." Chen Clan's cloth shop. Chen Chong looked at the young man who was limping into the shop and said, "Prince Xian, what are you doing here?" During the time of the national mourning, many of the princes rushed back to the capital. Now that the mourning period was over, the princes who stayed in the capital were already rushing back to their fiefs. Prince Xian had been attacked by the holy religion and had injured his leg, so he had been recuperating in the capital. He was the only exception among all the princes who had come of age. Over the past few days, Prince Xian came here every day. However, he did not create trouble and merely bought a piece of cloth every day. But the calmer he was, the heavier Chen Chong's heart became. "What's wrong? Don't tell me you're picky about who you sell your cloth to?" Prince Xian limped around the shop, looked at Chen Chong and asked, "You don't wish to sell it to I?" Chen Chong bowed. "Of course not. Don't worry, I's only here today to buy cloth." Prince Xian patted him on the shoulder and said, "Bring out the most expensive cloth in your shop. I can afford it." Chen Chong threw a glance at a servant in the shop, and that servant immediately went to the counter. Not long later, he came out with a piece of cloth in his hand and said, "Your Highness, this piece of cloth is the newest style in our shop. It's made from the best silk, and is priced at 100 taels." A guard took the piece of cloth and handed it to Prince Xian. Prince Xian touched it and said, "It's a good piece of satin and it's worth the price. I'll take this one. Pay up." Prince Xian waved his hand and said, "I'll be leaving first. I'll come back tomorrow." For a prince to personally come to this small cloth shop every day to buy a piece of cloth was a great honor to other cloth shops. However, to the Chen clan, it was an unparalleled pressure and torture. Chen Chong believed that this was something that Prince Xian would be happy to see. He fell silent for a moment and said, "Your Highness, what other cloth do you need? Why don't you buy it all together today? Rice has to be eaten bite by bite and cloth has to be bought piece by piece." Prince Xian turned to look at him and said, "Grudges have to be settled bit by bit. Don't you agree?" Chen Chong clenched his fists tightly and looked straight at him. Prince Xian slowly took 2 steps forward and said in a soft voice, "I like it when you can't stand the sight of me but can't do anything to me." He took a long look at Chen Chong and then walked out with large strides. Just then a figure walked out from the inner room and said softly, "Second brother, where's that piece of cloth made from the best silk? He's going to leave soon, and I wish to personally cut 2 sets of clothes for him." Chen Chong's countenance changed and he quickly walked over saying, Miao Yu, your body hasn't recovered yet. Why did you come out? Quickly go in. At the entrance of the cloth shop, Prince Xian's footsteps paused and he turned back. He took the cloth from the guard's hands and asked, Is it this one? Third young mistress Chun saw the piece of cloth in his hand and was stunned for a moment. Then she said with a troubled expression, Customer, can you give this piece of cloth to me? As compensation, you can choose any piece of cloth in the shop. Prince Xian. Her countenance changed, but Prince Xian broke into a smile. Unfortunately, I also like this cloth a lot. Prince Xian smiled and took out a pair of scissors from the counter at the side. He made a few cuts on the cloth in his hands, shook his head and said, It's just a pity. I bought it for 100 taels of silver. Seeing the pained expression on third young Miss Chen's face, Chen Chong's countenance sank, and he said fiercely, Your Highness Prince Xian, you're not welcome here. Please get out. Chen Chong, who do you think you are? Prince Xian's face, which had been wearing a smile all this while, suddenly turned extremely savage. He threw the cloth and scissors in his hands onto the ground, and green veins popped up on his forehead as he bellowed. Do you think that the Chen clan is still the same Chen clan? Do you think that Li will still be able to protect you? Chen Chong supported third young Miss Chun, clenching his fists tightly as he looked at Prince Xian, not saying a word. His Majesty disregarded the objections of the officials and members of the imperial clan, and conferred the title of Jiang of Silla to Li Yi. Although his status was extremely high, he had become a thorn in the eyes of many officials and nobles in the capital. His status was too high, and his authority was too great. His Majesty trusted him too much, trusting him to the extent that he could go against the opinions of all the officials and the ancestral rules, disregarding the repercussions, and act recklessly. While he was in the capital, Prince Xian could not act recklessly. Once he left the capital, one would be a guilty official while the other would be a prince. Even if Prince Xian were to do anything to them, he would not receive much punishment. It would be like how he had burned down the Zheng Manor previously. However, to the Chen clan, this could be a calamity. The higher one climbs, the worse one falls. The roar on Prince Xian's face gradually turned into maniacal laughter. He even laughed until tears rolled down his face. Jiang of Silla. Haha. Does he think that he's a prince just because His Majesty conferred him the title of Jiang of Silla? Won't he still have to leave the capital like a stray dog? After he leaves, it'll be your turn. The expression on Prince Xian's face gradually turned crazed. He wants one of my legs, but I want your Chen clan to pay with your lives. Chen Chong took in a deep breath, and his expression turned calm as he said, Lija, this is the capital. It's not a place where you can behave atrociously. Do you think that I'm the only one who wants your Chen clan to be destroyed? Prince Xian was no longer bothered by the fact that Chen Chong had called him by his name. Hearing that, he laughed out loud and said, The Wu family, the Qian family, the Wei family, the Zhang family. Which one of these people doesn't have a deep grudge against you guys? I know about the Wu family and the Qian family, but which one is the Wei family and the Zhang family? A voice suddenly rang out from the door. Prince Xian's smile grew even wider. The Wei family. Of course it's the Duke of Wei Manor. The Zhang family, the Zhang family. As he laughed, his voice gradually became softer. The smile on his face froze, revealing a horrified expression. Chapter 985. Which Zhang family is the Zhang family? Continue. Don't stop. There are still a few more families after that. You might as well say them all together. Li walked in from outside, looked at Prince Xian and said calmly. The maniacal smile and craziness on Prince Xian's face melted rapidly like snow. He silently turned and walked outside. When Li Yi was the county marquis, he could not afford to offend him. Now that Li Yi was the Jiang of Silla, and was in no way inferior to him in terms of status, it was even more so that he could not afford to offend Li Yi. Since he could not afford to offend Li Yi, he could only wait until Li Yi left the capital before offending the Chen clan. Thinking of leaving just like that, Li Yi turned, looked at him and asked, Don't you think it's too much to want to run after putting on airs? Prince Xian's growth was really great. He had grown from a naive and sweet prince to someone who could say things like, "I like how you can't do anything to me even if you can't stand the sight of me," in just a few months' time. Seeing that Prince Exian did not reply at all, neither did Prince Exian fly into a rage, nor did he ask him what he wanted, but Prince Exian simply walked out of the door. Li Yi was even more certain that hardships could really make one grow. Prince Exian had changed and was no longer the Prince Exian from before. Fong had been by his side for many years, and their cooperation was flawless. Before Li Yi could say anything, he had already blocked the door before Prince Exian walked out. Prince Exian threw him a glance and said in a deep voice, "Make way." A straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. Li Yi walked over, looked at Prince Exian, and said, "After what you said earlier, how can I leave the capital with peace of mind? Why can't you just bear with it a little longer? Don't you understand the logic of a little impatience spoiling great plans? A stray dog. Using your life to make up for it." Li Yi patted Prince Exian's shoulder and said, "Young man, remember not to be too full of yourself." Prince Exian felt an excruciating pain coming from his shoulder, and his forehead was drenched in sweat. He opened his mouth but was unable to make a sound. Li Yi patted his other shoulder and said, "There's no need to wait for me to leave the capital. You'll leave earlier than me." With both of his arms crippled, Prince Exian could not even let out a cry of pain. His vision turned dark and he fainted. A guard from Prince Exian Manor walked up and said with great difficulty, "Prince Jiang of Silla, bring him back." Li Yi picked up Prince Exian's collar and tossed him out, saying, "Don't come to the capital in the future." It was true that Prince Exian had become smarter, but he was not smart enough. Or rather, he was not patient enough. If Feng Xingjian had not coincidentally encountered him today, he might have really forgotten about this unstable factor. Of course, even if he had forgotten about it, he still had other arrangements for this place. With just Prince Exian or some other clans, they would not be able to create any waves. Miaoyu miaoyu. Suddenly, Chen Chong's panicked voice came from behind. Li Yi hurriedly turned around and saw Chen Chong supporting Third Miss Chen with an anxious expression. Third Miss Chen's face was pale and she looked very weak. She shook her head and said, "Second brother, I'm fine." She looked at Li Yi with a smile on her face. "You're here." Li Yi hurriedly walked over and asked, "What's wrong?" She smiled, shook her head and said, "I caught a cold 2 days ago. I'll be fine after some rest. It's not a big deal." Chen Chong turned to look at a shop assistant in the shop and said, "Li Jun, go get a doctor to take a look." "There's no need." Li Yi waved his hand, tossed something to Fong, and said, "Fong, take this token and go to the palace to get the imperial physician token over." "All right." Fong took the token and ran out quickly. Chen Chong's lips parted, but he did not say anything else. He turned and said, "Miaoyu, I'll help you in to rest for a while." Li Yi stayed in the shop. When Chen Chong came out, he asked with a grim countenance, "What's wrong with you? How do you take care of people? Why did you suddenly catch a cold?" Chen Chong looked at him and said, "When Miaoyu heard that you were leaving, she said that she wanted to personally make a few sets of clothes for you. She worked through the night to make them and fell sick yesterday." Li Yi found a chair and sat down, no longer speaking. Chen Chong sat down on the other side and glanced into the room. When he turned back, hesitation, confusion, and perplexity appeared on his face. After a moment, he suddenly asked, "You really have to leave?" Li Yi nodded. "I really have to leave." Chen Chong took a deep breath. After a long time, he said, "Take Miaoyu with you." Li Yi thought for a moment, then said, "Don't worry. After I leave, I will take care of the matters here." Chen Chong's eyes were bloodshot as he stared at him. He lowered his voice and said, "Do you still not understand? Miaoyu will not be happy if she stays here." Li Yi's eyes widened and he said angrily, "Why don't you try being fierce again?" Chen Chong closed his eyes and leaned against the back of the chair, as if all the energy in his body had been sucked out. Li Yi also looked into the room and said in a small voice, "I came here today precisely for this matter." Imperial physician Lu Jimin arrived very quickly. Just as he got off the carriage, he was carried in by Fong. "The medicine chest, don't forget the medicine chest." "I won't forget, hurry up." After standing up with great difficulty, he straightened his clothes and bowed respectfully to Li Yi. This lowly official greets His Highness Jiang of Silla. No need for such formalities. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Let's go in and take a look first." Lu Jimin nodded and walked into the room with the medicine chest on his shoulder. A moment later, he withdrew his 3 fingers from third young Miss Chen's wrist and said, "It's just a small cold. Coupled with the fact that you've been too tired these past 2 days, I'll prescribe a medicine. If you take it regularly, you'll be fine in 2 or 3 days." Chen Chong clasped his hands and said, "Many thanks, Lord Lu. I'll go write a prescription." Lu Jimin smiled and walked out of the room. Third sister, rest for a while. Chen Chong smiled at third young Miss Chen lying on the bed, and walked out of the room with Li Yi. Walking away from the door of the room, Chen Chong closed his eyes, clenched and unclenched his fists, loosened them, and clenched them again. After a long time he opened his eyes and said, "I'll take it as a promise." Li Yi looked at him and said, "You know that my promise is useless." Chen Chong took a deep breath and said, "I'll try to persuade Miayu." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Leaving the capital, leaving the Chen clan. She still won't be happy. It's the same principle." Chen Chong's eyes dimmed. "Your family is leaving the capital. How can our Chen clan follow?" "Who said it's just our family?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "There are several hundred to 1,000 people. If you want to leave, you can just be a coachman or coachman. It doesn't matter if there's one more person." This time around, they were leaving the capital to do something big. How could a few people be enough? The strategic center of the brothel was going to be shifted to the west, and they were going to build a new merchant group and build a business district in the west. The Lu Alliance would naturally have to shift their base as well. They were preparing to turn their previous business into a brothel. Those martial artists had been coming back and forth from the chaotic lands for the past 2 years, and had long since treated that place as their second base. Now that the Alliance head had left, what was the point of them remaining in the capital? In the past, they had been busy working for others and had been idling around. Now that they were finally going to fight for their own business, they were filled with vigor. Even their meals were much more delicious than before. Over 1,000 people. Chen Chong looked at him and was stunned for a moment before he gritted his teeth and said, "Why didn't you say so earlier? I saw that you were having a lot of mental activities earlier and couldn't bear to disturb you." After Chen Chong calmed down once again, Li Yi asked, "Do you remember the few clans that Prince Xian mentioned earlier? What are you going to do?" Chen Chong looked at him and asked, "Kill him." Chapter 986. In the main hall of the Wu clan, several people were seated at a table. There was a sumptuous feast on the table, and everyone was beaming. A middle-aged man let out a long sigh and said, "He's finally going to leave." The person next to him drank a cup of wine, finally feeling relieved. He nodded and said, "From a certain perspective, it's not a bad thing that His Majesty has conferred him the title of Jiang of Silla. It's easy to leave the capital, but it'll probably be difficult for him to return. It's good that he's gone. With him gone, there'll be no one who can protect the Chen clan. The Li family and the Chen clan have a deep feud to begin with. Who would have thought that he would actually? In any case, Prince Xian will definitely not let the Chen clan off this time around. We just need to wait patiently for a few more days." The news that Li Yi, the Jiang of Silla, was about to leave the capital made all the influential officials in the capital secretly heave a sigh of relief. Most people felt that His Majesty had favored him too much, and that it was detrimental to the stability of the court's politics. They felt that he had broken the rules of the aristocratic circle in the capital. After all, no one wished for the capital to have 2-3 emperors. Of course, to everyone present, due to the feud between him and the Chen clan, it would be hard for them to feel at ease with him in the capital. Therefore, they hoped that he would leave as soon as possible. After receiving this news, it was a must to hold a grand banquet. If it was not because they were worried that it would be too conspicuous, they would hold a banquet that lasted for 3 days. Right now, at the entrance of the Wu clan, Li Yi raised his head and looked at the signboard of the Wu clan and asked, "Is it this Wu clan?" Chen Chong nodded. "It's this Wu clan." On the way here, he had already thought through some things. Therefore, he was very cooperative with Li Yi. I've screwed it up. Fong stepped on the stone lion at the entrance of the Wu clan and leaped up. He took down the signboard of the Wu clan and broke it into several pieces with a palm strike. Before the gatekeeper of the Wu family could react, his family's plaque was smashed. He ran out and said angrily, "You, who are you? What do you want?" After coming out of the cloth shop, they went directly to the nearest Wu family. Only Fong and Su were with them. Su disdained to do these things, so he followed them with his hands behind his back to watch the fun. Although Fong could do it alone, it was time-consuming and laborious. "Call your master out." Li Yi looked at the gatekeeper and said, "We don't have enough manpower. Let him find someone to help." The gatekeepers of large families rarely didn't know how to read people. In fact, after sitting in this position for a long time, they even knew how to read people better than their own master. Seeing that this young man had asked someone to smash the Wu family's signboard and humiliate the Wu family, yet he could still calmly call out to the old master. It was either that he had a powerful background or that he was crazy. Judging from the young man's temperament and the sturdy man, the former was more likely. The gatekeeper glanced at the broken signboard once more before running inside. The sloppy old man clasped his hands behind his back and said with great interest, "It's really great to be a prince." When the master of the Wu family heard that someone had smashed the plaque of the Wu family, he immediately rushed out with his men in a rage. This behavior was more ruthless than a slap in the face. It was something that all the families who valued face couldn't tolerate. He was the first to rush into the yard with his men, and was the first to kneel. "Greetings, Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness," the master of the Wu family said in a trembling voice, his face pale and his voice trembling. Unless it was a special occasion, such as the coronation of a new emperor or an important ceremony, officials didn't have to kneel when they saw the emperor. Naturally, they didn't have to kneel when they saw the prince. However, the master of the Wu family still knelt, because his legs were so weak that he couldn't stand up. The person before them had once been their nightmare. Although he was going to leave the capital soon, as long as he was in the capital, they wouldn't wake up from their nightmare. "There's no need to be so courteous. I'll be embarrassed later on." Li Yi looked at him and said, "Do you know why I'm here today?" The master of the Wu family said in a trembling voice, I don't know. I'm here to cause trouble." Li Yi looked at the master of the Wu family and said, "But we don't have enough manpower now. Can the Wu family help out?" The master of the Wu family knew that he was here to cause trouble, and also knew why he was here. Prince Xian, that fool. He had clearly said to bear with it a little more. "Yes." The master of the Wu family steeled his heart and said, gritting his teeth, "Go and call all the guards in the clan over." Between causing trouble for the Wu family or completely wiping out the Wu family from the capital, even a fool would know how to choose. The guards of the Wu family arrived very soon. The person in the lead looked at the master of the Wu family and immediately asked, "Master, where are the troublemakers?" Smash. The master of the Wu family squeezed out this word from his throat. Smash. The guard was stunned for a moment and asked, "Smash what?" "Smash the Wu family." The master of the Wu family picked up a bonsai plant in the courtyard and smashed it fiercely onto the ground, causing soil to splatter everywhere. He looked at the guard and asked, "Smash it like this, understand?" Old master." The guard looked at the master of the Wu family in a daze, feeling both surprised and doubtful. Could his old master be? Could he have gone crazy? Seeing that the guard was still standing there in a daze, the master of the Wu family kicked him fiercely and said furiously, "Hurry up. If you're not going to make a move, pack up your things and scram." The guard swallowed his saliva again, looked behind him and said to the crowd, "Did you hear that? Smash it." Fong pointed to the inside of the room and said, "And inside?" The master of the Wu family kicked another guard and said loudly, "Go inside and smash it." Fong reminded him, "Pick the expensive ones and smash them." The master of the Wu family had a pained expression on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, "Pick the expensive ones and smash them." Thus, the servants of the Wu family discovered a very strange scene. With their old master taking the lead and the guards, they smashed everything they could see in the house. The old master tore his favorite painting and smashed the vase he had bought with a lot of money a few days ago. The coral he had just smashed was worth 5,000 taels of silver. In the end, when there was nothing else to smash, their old master finally reached out his evil hand to the innocent tables and chairs. The Wu family was already in a mess. After searching around the house, they really couldn't find anything to smash. The master of the Wu family panted heavily and walked quickly to Li Yi's side. He asked carefully, "Your Highness, look, is it okay?" "It's not bad." Li Yi nodded and said, "Let's forget about this matter. Tomorrow, you can resign and retire. You don't need my help, do you?" The master of the Wu family hurriedly shook his head. "No need, no need." The people behind him watched with fear in their hearts. Sir Wu was in the prime of his life, and it was the time when his career was the smoothest. For him to resign and retire at this time. Resigning and retiring at this time was already the best ending. If he needed Jiang of Silla's help to resign and retire, the ending might be a little different. Resigning and going to prison, resigning to a desolate place 1,000 li away, were all things that couldn't be more normal. Anyone could see that Jiang of Silla was venting his anger. He wasn't targeting the Wu family. He was targeting all the officials and nobles in the capital. The matter with the Chen family was just a prelude. He was establishing his might, and he was also intimidating. He was intimidating those who wanted to make a move after he left the capital. This was also the first time he was establishing his might after being conferred the title of Jiang of Silla. Only now did they realize that Jiang of Silla was Jiang of Silla. Before he became Jiang of Silla, the Cui family had offended him. The Cui family had fallen, and the king of Shu had offended him. The throne that had been in his hands had flown away. Now that he was already a prince, there were actually people who thought that this was the end of his road. Feng walked around the Wu family and asked Chen Chong, "Old Chen, where to next?" "The Qian family." Chen Chong thought for a moment, then said to a person watching nearby, "Sir Qian, please lead the way." Chapter 987. Sir Qian, please lead the way. Chen Chong's words caused the expression of a middle-aged man in the crowd to change. The Qian family and the Chen family had some old grudges. Of course, at that time, the Chen family was still a big tree in the imperial court. The Qian family spent a lot of money and connections to get an important position with great difficulty, but it was replaced by a member of the Chen family. For the Chen family, this might be done casually, but for the Qian family it was a big loss. In the past, the Chen clan was backed by the king of Shu and had extraordinary influence in the imperial court. It was not something a mid-tier clan like the Qian clan could compare to. However, that was then and this was now. Now the Qian family was like the sun in the sky, while the Chen family had fallen to the level of commoners. It was time to get revenge for the past. Who would have thought that the news would be leaked in advance and actually attract such a great god? Chen Chong looked at the stunned middle-aged man and shook his head. "Forget it. I originally thought that Lord Qian was familiar with the road. Since Lord Qian is unwilling, we'll go ask a few passers-by." "Wait." The middle-aged man walked out from the crowd and said in a low voice, "I'm familiar with the road. There's no need to trouble others. Marquis Wei, Assistant Minister Zhang, do you want to go together?" Chen Chong looked at the people in the crowd and said, "In a while, I will have to trouble you." Even he himself felt that he was very arrogant when he said that. Even when the Chen family was at its peak, he had never been so arrogant. However, at the thought of what Prince Xian had said earlier, "Pay with your life," the flames in his heart that had been extinguished with great difficulty reignited once again. He only wanted these people to lead the way. What they wanted was the Chen family's life. Was this too much? A moment later, in the Qian family. "Master, you are back." When the gatekeeper of the Qian family saw his master walk in, he immediately went forward and said respectfully. The head of the Qian clan said in a low voice, "Let all the maids and servants come out." Gathering all the maids and servants in the mansion was something that had never happened before. The gatekeeper looked at him in surprise and asked, "Master, is there something wrong?" The head of the Qian clan clenched his teeth and said, "Do as I say." Seeing the patriarch's expression, the gatekeeper quivered and hurriedly ran into the mansion after responding, Soon all the guards, maids, and servants of the Qian clan had gathered in front of the Qian clan. The Qian clan's clan had looked at the signboard above the main gate, clenched his teeth, and said, "Smash! I'll go back first." Li Yi looked at Chen Chong, shook his head and said, "I'll leave the rest to you. Fong, stay by his side for now." "All right." Fong nodded his head. When he saw the Qian clan's servants struggling to reach the plaque on the gate, he quickly walked up and smiled. "Let me help you." On the way back, the sloppy old man picked his nose and asked, "Kid, it doesn't feel good to be at a disadvantage, right?" "It doesn't feel good to be at a disadvantage." Li Yi nodded and said, "But it feels good to be a bully." Everything that had happened today was indeed for some people to see. They feared and feared him, thinking that he was powerful and lawless. If he didn't do something lawless, wouldn't he disappoint many people? On the way back to the cloth shop, he happened to see Chen Lijun returning with the medicine. This person, who had once been one of the capital's greatest profligates, had long since been worn down by life. When he saw Li Yi, he avoided eye contact and hurriedly said, "Greetings, Your Highness Jiang of Silla." Li Yi waved his hand and asked, "Are you going to brew the medicine?" Chen Lijun nodded. Li Yi took the medicine from his hands and said, "I'll do it." Chen Lijun was startled and was about to say something when Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't waste words. Go get the clay pot." Brewing medicine was a technical job that required a great deal of patience. Li Yi had endured 2 months for Mississippi Lu, so he naturally had a lot of experience. He squatted in the courtyard, holding a small fan in his hand, carefully controlling the heat. In a certain room, on a bed next to the window, a pale-faced married lady looked through the window at the busy figure in the courtyard with a smile in her eyes. Before one of the influential families in the capital, Chen Chong looked at the golden signboard, shook his head and sighed. "It's a pity." Before him, a middle-aged man gritted his teeth and said, "Smash!" In the palace, all the members of the royal family in the capital had gathered. After an imperial physician checked on Prince Xian, he replied respectfully, "Your Majesty, Empress Dowager, Prince Xian's arms are probably crippled." Prince Xian had already woken up, but his countenance was terrifyingly pale. He sobbed and said, "Empress Dowager, brother, look at how arrogant that Li Yi has become." Li Xian looked at him and asked, "You're a prince. Would you personally go to the cloth shop to buy cloth?" Prince Xian was speechless. Li Xian asked again, "Could it be that he crippled your arms just because you bought a bolt of cloth?" Prince Xian was speechless. Li Xian asked again, "Why did you go to the Chen clan's cloth shop?" Prince Xian endured the pain and said, "When I entered the palace, that Li Yi was leading his subordinates and barging into the official residences of the important officials in the imperial court, smashing and looting them. He's showing no regard for the law." "Which one did he smash?" "The Wu family and the Qian family." Li Xian waved his hand. "Summon them into the palace." Over the past few days, no one from the Li clan who strongly objected to Li Xian conferring Li Yi the title of Jiang of Silla said anything. He was clearly about to leave. Why was Prince Xian courting death? At a time like this, what else could he not do? Very soon, the heads of the Wu family and the Qian family were summoned into the palace. After the two of them entered the palace, they immediately greeted, "Your subjects pay their respects to Your Majesty and Empress Dowager." Li Xian looked at the two of them and went straight to the point. "Prince Xian said that the Jiang of Silla smashed your residences?" Prince Xian endured the pain and turned to look at the two of them, wearing a hopeful expression. The heads of the Wu family and the Qian family exchanged a glance and shook their heads at the same time. "I wonder where Your Highness Prince Xian heard the rumors." "There's no such thing." "That's right. 2 days ago, I discussed with Lord Qian and planned to renovate the residences. Today we smashed it ourselves and can start work tomorrow." "Lord Wu is right. Your Majesty mustn't listen to the rumors." Prince Xian looked at the two of them who were explaining with a serious expression. He felt that it was not just his arms that were hurting, but his heart was hurting as well. He could not move his arms, and could only use his feet to point at the two of them. You guys." The head of the Wu family looked at him, shook his head and said, "Your Highness Prince Xian, you mustn't believe in the rumors. Prince Xian lay on the ground, looking at the roof of the hall. His eyes finally lost their color. Li Xian threw a glance at him, shook his head and said, "I'll get 2 imperial physicians to follow you. You can set off for your conferred land tomorrow." Li did not care if Prince Xian entered the palace to lodge a complaint, nor did he care about the aftermath of the matter between the Qian family and the Wu family. He finished brewing the medicine, helped third young Miss Chen up, and then used a spoon to feed it to her. He put down the bowl, looked at her and asked, "Is it bitter?" She nodded and said, "A little." "Eat an apple. It won't be bitter after you eat it." Li picked up an apple and started to peel it. The only maid in the room watched in astonishment as the apple skin slid down in a spiral shape. Before it landed on the ground, she reached out to catch it. Third young Miss Chen looked at that maid and said softly, "Xiao, you can leave first." The maidservant responded and retreated out of the room. Li cut the apple into slices and handed it to her on a plate. She placed the plate at the side, held Li Yi's hand, and looked at him in a daze. Li Yi sat at the side of the bed. She suddenly put out her other hand and placed it on his face, gently caressing it. Li Yi did not dodge. "Here," she suddenly said. Li Yi looked at her. "Can you call me mother?" Chapter 988. Can you call me mother? When third Miss Chen said these words, Li Yi saw some affection, some tenderness, and some indescribable complexity in her eyes. "You have always been," Li Yi said softly as he tightened his grip on her hand. He revealed a smile on his face. "Mother." "Ah." A faint blush appeared on her pale face. She nodded her head and responded, seemingly using all the strength in her body. It took more than 2 hours for Fang and Chen Chong to return. In the end, the Qian family, Wei family, and Zhang family had all met the same fate as the Wu family. They had destroyed their own manners, resigned from their positions, and retired. The first to jump out always received the harshest punishment, but it was not the harshest. If they left the circle of the nobility in the capital and left the court, they could still become a wealthy official. At the very least, their clans could be preserved. After today, if there were still people who did not know the difference between life and death and jumped out, then he would not give them any leeway. Li looked at Chen Chong and said, "Make preparations. We will leave at the beginning of May." It was no longer suitable for the Chen family to remain in the capital. Although Chen Chong did not like him and he did not like Chen Chong, he could not make his godmother sad. This time he could count him in. Chen Chong looked at Li Yi and asked, "Miao Yushi?" Li Yi waved his hand. "Later today, I will come to pick her up." Chen Chong nodded and said no more. Fang seemed rather excited. Using violence to solve problems was his hobby. He was the happiest person to leave the capital this time. If it were not for the fact that he still had his wife and Xiao Hong at home, he would have made countless trips back and forth between the capital and Suzhou. He looked in surprise at Li Yi and asked, "Son-in-law, your eyes are a little red. What's wrong? Did San get in?" "The wind is rather strong today." The stone hanging in his heart finally fell. Li Yi nodded, stood, and said, "Let's go back." Li Duan wasn't used to the sudden addition of an elder. He still couldn't understand some things, but he liked the sudden appearance of this grandma. A grandma who would feed him delicious food and play with him was much better than his aunt who always spanked him. Rui and third Miss Chen had known each other for a long time. She often visited her with Li Yi. As for Zui Mo and Ruoqing, they were more familiar with each other. It was just that they were not used to calling each other mother, instead of Mrs. Chen, and they would blush a little. The women were talking in the inner courtyard, while Tseng Shichen and Chen Chong were drinking in a corner of the outer courtyard. When Li Yi walked out, he got up and patted him on the shoulder, saying in a low voice, "Treat Zima well." There was already a hint of drunkenness in his voice. During these few days at home, Li Yi had seen many people and drunk a lot. Lu Dao, Lu Yi, Dong Wenyun, these old acquaintances from Qing and Fu had all come to visit. There were also some friends he had made after coming to Jingdou. After this parting, he didn't know when he would see them again. A young girl's clear voice came from behind him. Li Yi turned his head and saw Shanning standing behind him. She blinked at him and asked, "Sir, are you going out today?" Shanning and Yongning had been at home these few days. Because there were many things to arrange before they left, they didn't have much time to spend with them. Li reached out a hand and said, "I'll take you out to play today." "Okay." A smile immediately appeared on her little face. "I'll go call Yongning." Just as she turned to run back, Li shook his head and said, "I won't call Yongning today." "Ah, that's not good." She paused and blushed slightly. She put her hand in Li Yi's hand and walked outside as she spoke with embarrassment. It was just her and her teacher going out. Was this a date, just like last year's Lantern Festival night? That night, it was also just her and her teacher. They had even hooked their hooks. Her teacher had also said that he would never abandon her. After the death of the previous emperor, according to etiquette, Jingdo was not allowed to have fun for 100 days. During this time, the brothels, and theaters were all closed. Now that the 100-day period had just passed, Jingdo, which had been suppressed for a long time, showed an unprecedented liveliness and prosperity. After walking to the crowded street, Ning forgot about her bashfulness and returned to the nature of a girl. "Sugar man, sir, there's a sugar man. I want to eat this puppy." Li paid and gave her a puppy. After eating it quickly, she looked at Li expectantly and asked, "Sir, can I eat another one?" She liked to eat sweets. Usually, when Li brought her and Ning out, he only allowed her to eat 2 at most. Seeing her blinking expectantly at him, Li took out an ingot of silver and put it on the table. He took down all the sugar men and handed them to her, saying, "They're all for you." "Really?" Her eyes began to twinkle like little stars. Li stuffed a dozen sugar men into her hands and said, "Eat them. Eat as many as you want today." "Thank you, sir. You're the best." She resisted the urge to kiss Li Yi's face. She took out a sugar man and handed it to Li Yi and said, "Sir, eat one too." In the past few months, she had been depressed for a long time. It had been a long time since she had seen such a bustling capital. "Sir, come quickly." A person who passed by just now said that someone is performing a sword-swallowing performance in front. After eating 3 sugar men, she stopped eating. She handed all the sugar men to the guards behind her, took Li Yi's hand, and ran to the place where the crowd gathered in front. The roadside performance place had been surrounded by 3 layers of people. It was impossible to squeeze in. She was anxiously walking around outside. Li Yi bent down, grabbed her waist with both hands, lifted her up, and put her on his shoulder. He asked, "Can you see it now?" And yes. The little girl blushed and answered in a low voice. She was no longer interested in the sword-swallowing performance inside. She used to envy Yongning, who could be carried by Sir and ride on his neck, but she had grown up. When a girl grew up, she should be more ladylike. How could Sir let a ladylike girl sit on his shoulder? How embarrassing. However, although it was embarrassing, she still didn't want to get down. After watching the performance absent-mindedly, when Li put her down, the little girl's face was still red. A moment later, in a clothing store somewhere, Ning was wearing a slightly mature dress. She picked up the skirt and turned it around. She looked at Li Yi and asked, "Sir, this dress is so beautiful. Do I look good in it?" "Yes." Li Yi looked at it carefully and nodded. He turned back and said, "Wrap it up." "In a jewelry store somewhere." "Sir, do I look good wearing this hairpin?" "Yes." "What about this?" "It looks good too." She tried on all the jewelry that she slightly liked in the store. As long as she asked, Li Yi would buy it regardless of the price. Finally, her gaze landed on a woman's sword inlaid with jewels hanging in the store. She looked at Li Yi and asked tentatively, "Sir, I want to learn martial arts from Royal Sister. I'm so envious of Royal Sister and Sister Rui. When I become as powerful as Royal Sister, I can protect myself and Sir. This sword." Li Yi nodded and looked at the shopkeeper at the side. He said, "Take that sword down." She was wearing the newly bought clothes with a sword hanging on her waist. She held a sugar figurine in each hand. Even when she reached home, the smile on her face didn't disappear. Today's Sir was different from before. He was especially nice to her today. Although Sir had been nice to her in the past, he wouldn't let her wear adult clothes, eat so many sugar figurines, play with dangerous things like knives and swords, and definitely wouldn't let her sit on his shoulder. However, Sir was so nice to her. Why did she feel empty in her heart? This feeling was like the time when she lost her favorite knight Emingzu. Chapter 989. Yesterday, Prince Xian's hands had been crippled. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, several official residences in the capital had been smashed. This was already considered an extremely vile incident. By right, even if it would not cause a great impact, it should still cause some commotion. However, the imperial court today was as calm as usual. Prince Xian had left the capital early in the morning. His old injuries had yet to recover, and now he had suffered new ones. Right now, he did not even have time to recuperate. He would probably not be able to avoid suffering along the way, and would not feel too comfortable. During the morning assembly, the 5 officials resigned at the same time. The emperor and the princess had tacitly agreed to it, and the officials knew what had happened. They did not say anything, but they all threw a glance at the figure standing at the very front. Li Yi had made a rare appearance in the imperial court today. It was because this should be the last time he would be attending the imperial court. The status of the one-word prince was higher than that of the prime minister. Prime Minister Shen and the newly appointed Right Minister Dong Wenyun were also ranked behind him. After the morning assembly, he did not leave the palace but waited in front of the political hall. "When are you leaving?" Emingzu, who had taken off her court attire, appeared behind him and walked over to stand next to him. "Tomorrow," Li Yi replied. The two of them sank into a long period of silence. Emingzu suddenly said, "I want to eat egg fried rice." "All right." Li Yi nodded and asked, "Are we going to the dining hall or the morning dew hall?" Emingzu gave it some thought and said, "The morning dew hall." In another palace in the palace, the girl held a pearl hair clip in each of her hands, turned her head, and asked, "Mother, do you think I look better wearing this pearl hair clip or this one?" The lady in palace attire walked over, sat down next to her, and asked, "Ninger, you have your own clothes, but you don't wear them. You have your own jewelry, but you wear mother's clothes. Why are you using mother's pearl hair clips?" "Because mother is the most beautiful." The girl mumbled and said, "I want to become as beautiful as mother, even more beautiful than before." Concubine Yin touched her hair and asked softly, "Ninger, why do you want to become more beautiful?" "Because Sir is leaving." The girl's expression collapsed. She said reluctantly, "I want Sir to remember my most beautiful appearance." The woman hugged her in her arms and gently placed her chin on her forehead. Looking down at her, her gaze gradually became gentle as she whispered, "Our Ninger has grown up." The girl's beautiful eyes suddenly lit up. She raised her head and asked, "Really? Mother also thinks that I've grown up. When I grow up, I'll be able to get Brother Xian to issue an edict. Although you've grown up, you're still not old enough. You still need a few more years." Concubine Yin lovingly touched her head and said, "Mother will help you dress up. I'll definitely make our Ning heir look beautiful." Not long after, the girl lifted the hem of her dress and spun around in front of a huge dressing mirror. She murmured in disbelief, "Imperial Mother, is this me?" Concubine Yin lovingly adjusted the position of the hair clip on her head and said, "Our Ning heir is growing more and more beautiful." She blushed and said, "I'm going to find teacher now. There's no hurry." Concubine Yin pulled her to sit down and pulled her into her arms. She said, "Ning heir, do you still remember what mother said to you?" She thought for a moment and said, "Mother said that if you want to capture a man's heart, you have to capture a man's stomach first." This sentence is wrong. If a man likes you, no matter how bad your cooking is, he will still say that he likes you. Mother also said that if a man says he doesn't have it, then he really does. Mother also said. She counted with her fingers. She already understood some of what her mother said, but she still didn't fully understand some of it. She raised her head to look at her mother and asked, "Which sentence is mother referring to?" Concubine Yin looked at her and asked, "Do you still remember what mother said about the most important thing in a woman's life?" She thought for a moment and said, "Mother said that the most important thing in a woman's life is to find someone to rely on." Concubine Yin nodded and stroked her hair. She said, "Ning heir has grown up. In a few years, it will be time for you to get married." She blushed and said, I'm not in a hurry. Ning heir, you have to remember that if you meet someone you like in the future, you have to boldly like him. Concubine Yan's expression suddenly became serious. She looked at her and said, but sometimes, you have to let him remember you. It's not enough to let him see your most beautiful appearance. To let him remember you, you have to make him feel pain first. To let him remember you forever, you have to make him feel pain. To let him remember you, you have to make him feel pain first. She looked at her mother in confusion and asked, what does that mean? Ning Er will know in the future. Concubine Yan touched her head and said, go. Li Yi had always felt that Emingzu was a loyal person. She had eaten the same taste of egg fried rice from Jinghe's first year to Jinghe's 5th year, and had never gotten tired of it. A loyal man was not easy to find, and a loyal woman was also rare. Li Yi was actually attracted by the way she focused on eating the egg fried rice. When she raised her head to look at him, he looked away in embarrassment. She finished eating and put down her spoon. She looked at him and said, remember to explain to Shanning. Li Yi nodded and said, I will explain it to her. Emingzu suddenly raised her head and looked at him. She asked, then how are you going to explain it to me? Li Yi shook his head and said, if I don't leave the capital, he won't be able to be stable as an emperor. Emingzu looked at him and said, this is what you should explain to him. Without me, you can still handle these things very well. Li Yi shook his head and said, the affairs of the country are important, but I hope that when everything settles down, you can think about yourself. I have already thought about myself. Emingzu looked at him and said, remember what you said that day. Li Yi thought about it and asked, that day when I was drunk, what did I say to you? Emingzu shook her head and said, when you come back, I will tell you. I will come back. Don't be too long. It won't be too long. Li Yi turned to leave the Morning Dew Palace. His wrist was suddenly grabbed by her. For me, can't you stay? She lowered her head and said in a low voice. Li Yi turned his head, and was silent for a long time before he raised his hand, and helped her remove a grain of rice from the corner of her mouth. He said, your identity is different now. In the future, when you eat egg fried rice, don't lose your composure. She raised her head to look at Li Yi and shook her head. She said, before you come back, I won't eat egg fried rice again. Walking out of the Morning Dew Palace, Li Yi's mood was somewhat heavy. Just as she could not leave with him, he could not stay either. He looked forward to the wider sky outside. This capital, to him, was no different than a cage. This should be the most correct choice. But it was not the best choice. It was not good for Emingzu, and it was not good for Shanning. Thinking of that pure girl without a trace of impurity, his heart felt somewhat stifled. There were some things that he did not want her to know. She would only think that this was just a simple trip. When they were tired and had enough, they would come back and everything would be the same as before. When Li Yi stopped in front of a certain palace, a clear voice came from behind him. Sir. He turned his head and saw a girl standing there, a woman. She had a pearl flower in her hair. Unlike the playful style of a young girl in the past, she exuded a kind of grace and steadiness that had never been seen before. She wore a palace dress. It was not the style of a young girl, but it was luxurious and dignified. Her face was lightly powdered, concealing what little remained of her inexperience. When Li Yi looked at her, he felt as if he had passed through time and was extremely unreal. She looked at the stunned Li Yi, and a faint smile appeared on her face. She spoke again. Sir. Chapter 990. After a long time, Li Yi combined the image of the beautiful woman in front of him with that of Shanning. He looked at her and said in disbelief, why are you dressed like this? She picked up her dress and slowly turned it around in front of Li Yi. She said with some pride, Mother dressed me up. Do I look good? A young girl was a young girl. As soon as she opened her mouth, the mature image that she had just created in front of Li Yi immediately fell apart. Li Yi smiled and reached out to touch her head out of habit. Seeing her current appearance, he took his hand back and nodded. You look good. Her big, bright eyes immediately curved into crescent moons. She lowered her head and walked forward while kicking her feet. She said, Lady Mother said that in a few years, I will be able to get married. Now I have to learn how to dress myself up beautifully. I heard that the day a girl gets married is the day she looks the most beautiful. Li had a little admiration for Yan Fei. She was born into a wealthy family and should have been very calm and upright, but she was not conservative at all. He didn't know how she usually educated the little girl. Sometimes the words that Shanning said were not what a little girl should say. Even he couldn't help but feel a little admiration when he heard it. This kind of characteristic was very rare in ancient women, especially in the imperial concubines. Li didn't ask her why she dressed up like this. When girls were young, they all had the experience of stealing their mother's lipstick, wearing their mother's clothes, and wearing their mother's high heels. They all dreamed of growing up faster. Even some boys had this kind of experience. Shanning suddenly turned to look at Li Yi and said seriously, "Sir, when you are outside, you have to think of me often." Li Yi nodded and said, "I promise I will think of you once a day." "Twice." "Okay then, twice." In the cold and desolate depths of the palace, two figures, one big and one small, were walking slowly. The girl was wearing adult clothes and had her head lowered as she walked. She was brimming with the aura of a young girl. As they chatted softly, there would be some pleasant laughter mixed in the Hall of Diligent Government. Li Xian put down the memorial and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. He looked down and asked, "What's the matter, Imperial Uncle?" A few days ago, when Li Yi was conferred the title of king, they were the ones who made the most noise. They were the elders of the Li family's imperial clan, so they couldn't be ignored like they were the court officials. Thus, when he saw these people, he felt a headache. The old man who had just walked into the hall bowed and said, "Your Majesty, we can't just let Jiang of Silla leave the capital." Li Xian knocked on the table and said with a frown, "Why can't you let Jiang of Silla leave the capital? What does Jiang of Silla's departure have to do with you?" "Your Majesty, don't forget that he knows the recipe for divine punishment." The old man bowed again and said in a loud voice, If he gives this secret recipe to the enemy country, our Jing kingdom will be in danger." Li Xian glared at him and said, "He's just going out to play. What are you talking about?" The old man looked at him and said, "Your Majesty, don't you understand? Jiang of Silla has moved his entire family out of the capital. It's obvious that he won't be able to come back." Li Xian was stunned, then looked at him and asked, "What did you say?" The old man looked into his eyes and panicked for no reason. "Your Majesty." Li Xian glared at him fiercely and said, "Repeat what you just said to us again." A moment later, a figure hurriedly walked out of the Hall of Diligent Government and walked quickly toward the Hall of Morning Dew. At the entrance of a palace somewhere, a girl waved at Li Yi and said, "Sir, I'll see you off tomorrow." Li Yi turned his head and waved at her, then bowed slightly to Concubine Yen and turned to leave. Concubine Yen patted her head and said, "Ninger, go back." She smiled and turned her head back and said, "Mother, go back first. I'll secretly see you off for a while, then go find my sister. I still need her to teach me martial arts." The Hall of Morning Dew. Li Xian looked at Emingzu, who was drinking alone, and asked in disbelief, "You already knew that he wouldn't come back, didn't you?" Emingzu didn't look at him and didn't say anything. Li Xian asked loudly, "He's not going out to play. He's hiding from us, isn't that right?" This guy. An angry expression appeared on his face and he said sternly, "I'll go find him." "Stop." Emingzu suddenly stood up and shouted in a low voice. Li Xian's footsteps stopped. She raised her head to look at him and said slowly, "Why are you going to find him? Don't you think you've caused enough trouble? Do you want his efforts to go to waste?" Li Xian's expression changed. Outside the door, a small figure stood there in a daze. Her face was pale and her body was trembling. Her eyes were already filled with tears. She was like a helpless fledgling or a little abandoned beast. She turned her head and looked in the direction of the palace entrance with a confused and helpless gaze. There was no one there. Her heart skipped a beat. She finally knew what she was going to lose. She bit her lower lip to prevent her tears from falling. She turned around and ran as fast as she could towards the palace entrance. Sir, don't you want me anymore? Don't you want Shanning anymore?" She finally could not hold it back. Big drops of tears rolled down from her eyes. She cried sadly and her voice was whimpering, "Sir, we've pinky hooks. You said you wouldn't leave me alone." The eunuchs and palace maids in the palace watched as the little princess ran past them with a heartbroken expression. They all panicked and hurriedly called for the palace guards. Even more people lifted up their clothes and chased after her. When she ran to the palace entrance, her hair was already in a mess and she had lost one of her shoes. Her delicate bare feet stepped on the ground. It was cold and painful, but she did not care about this. Because her husband was going to leave her. The palace guards had already discovered her, but no one dared to stop her. Because she was Princess Shining, the Princess Shining who did not need to care about any palace rules. They did not dare to stop the princess who was crying and only cared about running. They could only send 2 groups of guards to follow behind her. The leader of the guards anxiously said to his men, Quickly report to His Majesty, report to the princess." She ran quickly through the palace gate and came to the bustling street. Looking at the endless flow of people, she did not see the figure she wanted to see. She clenched her fists and weakly released them. She was like a puppet that had lost its soul. She stood on the street in a daze, and then slowly squatted down. Her sobs turned into loud wails. "Sir, you don't want me anymore. You don't want Shining anymore. We've pinky hooks, we've clearly pinky hooks. You broke your promise first, you liar, liar." She cried sadly and grieved. At first, they could still hear what she was saying, but later on, her voice became vague and unclear. The passers-by on the street looked at this scene in amazement. A girl dressed in luxurious clothes, obviously of extraordinary status, squatted on the ground and wailed. She cried and said something at the same time. 2 groups of armored guards with weapons in their hands surrounded her, not allowing anyone to get close. They did not know what had happened to the girl, but they could feel her sadness. Many of them could not bear to see her. The girl is crying so sadly. I wonder who is so heartless. What a beast. After an unknown period of time, a figure walked out from the crowd and waved his hand. The surrounding guards immediately opened up a path. Bad person, liar." The girl who was squatting on the ground suddenly felt someone pat her shoulder. She raised her head and through the blurry tears, she saw a familiar face. Lee stretched out his hand and wiped the tears off her face. He gently tapped her nose and said, "If you continue to cry, you won't be pretty anymore." Then he carried her horizontally, passed through the row of guards, passed through the crowd, and slowly disappeared from everyone's sight. Chapter 991. Fong could see that the son-in-law was in a bad mood when he came out of the imperial palace. He did not take the carriage but chose to walk back. Although he did not show it on the surface, Fong could easily see this after being by his side for so many years. It was not until the little girl ran out of the imperial palace and squatted on the street and wailed. She cried her heart out and cried her lungs out. Only then did he find the reason for the son-in-law's bad mood. He looked up at the gray sky and shook his head. What a sin! Li Yi held the girl horizontally in his arms. Her head was buried in Li Yi's chest and she was still sobbing. Very quickly his chest was soaked. Li Yi looked at her messy hair, bare feet, and messy clothes. He turned around and walked into a shop on the street. "Your Highness!" The girls in the shop hurriedly bowed. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Go get a basin of hot water and bring a new set of clothes and socks over." He carried the girl into the room and gently placed her on the bed. She was no longer crying. She lowered her head and turned around, no longer looking at him. Li Yi sat down next to her and softly asked, "Are you still angry at me?" She shook her head and sniffed. "I am not angry at teacher. I just don't want teacher to see me cry. I must be very ugly right now." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Our Shining is always the most beautiful no matter what." She raised her head. Her eyes were red and swollen, and the tears had not yet dried. She looked at Li Yi and softly asked, "Teacher, are you really going to abandon Shining?" Li Yi looked at her red and swollen eyes. In his mind, her helpless and heartbroken appearance appeared. He shook his head and said, "Teacher will not abandon you. Your Highness, the water is here." One of the girls fetched some water, while the other girl brought some clean clothes, shoes, and socks and placed them beside the bed. Li Yi wet the towel and wrung it dry, carefully wiping her little face. The girl's delicate little face was soft and elastic, and after washing off the light makeup, it returned to a delicate and jade-like appearance. Then he carried her to the bedside, soaked her dirty little feet in the water, and gently rubbed them. There were still tears in her eyes, but she couldn't help giggling. She quickly said, "Sir, it's ticklish. Bear with it. It'll be over in a while." Li helped her wash the dust off her feet and wiped her feet clean. He pointed at her tear-soaked clothes and pointed at the new clothes by the bed and said, "Put on the new clothes first." Then he turned around and walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. A few girls were guarding outside the door. When they saw him, they immediately saluted. "You don't have to be so polite in the future." Most of these girls were from the brothels. Li waved his hand and asked, "Is everything ready?" One of the girls nodded and said with a smile, "Everything is ready. We can leave tomorrow. Later today there will be new sisters coming to take over." This time, leaving the capital was not a simple family trip. In addition to his family, he had to take many people with him, including most of the top management of the brothels and shops. The place they were going to was at the border of the three countries. In the future, no matter which side or the three countries developed together, they would need a lot of manpower. The road was long, and if he wanted to become the man of the mountain bandit king, he had to deal with all kinds of accidents in the future. In addition to enough manpower and powerful strength, he also had to have enough money. Although the Li family was rich, it was not a bad thing to have more money. This time, the people accompanying him would be the backbone of building a new business empire. In addition, the Lu Meng would move as a whole. In the future, the center of the martial arts world would also move from the capital to the west. Although this was only the first batch, there were more than 1,000 people. At a certain moment, the door opened and a girl walked out. She had removed all the makeup on her face and changed into a new set of clothes. Other than her messy hair and red and swollen eyes, she had returned to her original appearance. Li looked at her hair and shook his head. He took her hand and walked back to the room. He sat her in front of the dressing table and picked up a comb to help her comb her hair. She sat there obediently and looked at the figure standing behind her through the mirror. He was focused on helping her with her makeup. His expression was so focused, and his eyes were so serious. It made her heart gradually calm down. Li spent a full quarter of an hour before he managed to do her favorite flying immortal hair bun. She suddenly said, "Sir." "Yes." Li was focused on combing her hair and softly said, "Yes, sir." "Yes, sir." Li looked at her in surprise and asked, "What's wrong?" She smiled and said, "Nothing. Sir is about to leave. I wanted to call you a few more times. In the future, I won't be able to." Li lowered his head to look at her and softly said, "If you say you want to leave, Sir will take you with him." She raised her head and looked into Li's eyes. She saw tenderness and love in his eyes. Her mother looked at her like this, and her sister looked at her like this. Sir liked her, just like her mother liked her, and also like her sister liked her. But she knew that the way she looked at Sir would not be like this. At this moment, she suddenly understood some of what her mother said. She also understood that Sir only thought of her as a child. But she was no longer a child. She shook her head and looked at Li. She smiled and said, "I won't leave. After father leaves, only mother will be left. If I also leave, mother will be very lonely, very lonely. I want to stay here with her." Li combed the hair on her temples. Although her face was full of smiles, he suddenly felt a bit of heartache. "I know that Sir will definitely come back. We made a pinky promise." She stood up and put her hands behind her back. She stood on her tiptoes and looked at Li. She sweetly said, "In the future, I will listen to mother in the palace. I will eat well, sleep well, and do my homework well. I will grow up well, and wait for Sir to come back." Li looked at her in a daze. When she wore the clothes of an adult, wore the jewelry of an adult, and had her hair combed like an adult. When she said that she had grown up, Li felt that she was a child. Now, she wore the clothes of a young girl without any makeup. Her face was brimming with the smile of a young girl. She used the tone of a young girl to tell him that she would eat well, sleep well, and grow up well. When he came back, the girl in his memory had already disappeared from his eyes. She no longer said that she had grown up. She had already grown up. The young girl had grown up in an instant, and the smile on her face was as bright as a mountain flower. Li Yi's face was pale. His heart seemed to be tightly gripped by someone, and the pain pierced through his heart. Chapter 992. When he held Shaning's hand again and walked out of the room, Li Xian and Emingzu were already waiting outside the door. Emingzu looked at Shaning with a worried expression. Li Xian walked over and was about to speak when Li looked at them and said, "Let's talk when we get back." In the Li family, because Shaning's eyes were swollen like peaches, Rui and Third Miss Chen looked at him with reproach. Mississippi Lu looked at him with slight disdain. It was shameful for him to bully a child because he couldn't beat her. Li naturally couldn't explain anything. On the contrary, Shaning kept smiling and saying that she was fine. They held her hand and asked her all kinds of questions. In the room, Li Yi and Li Xian sat opposite each other. They didn't look at each other. "Why didn't you tell me?" Li Xian drank a cup of tea and put it on the table fiercely. He gritted his teeth and said, "Am I so scary that you moved your whole family out of the capital?" "You're not scary." Li Yi shook his head and said, "You're just stupid." Li Xian suddenly hit the table and said angrily, "How dare you scold me? What's wrong with scolding you?" Li Yi looked at him and said in an unfriendly tone, "Try hitting the table again. Do you believe that I won't hit you?" Li Xian didn't dare to try because he knew that Li Yi really dared to hit him. Most importantly, he couldn't beat him. He leaned against the chair with some frustration and said, "I didn't think it through. I didn't discuss it with you in advance. Is there no way to make it up? Do you have to leave?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "No." Li Xian looked at him and said anxiously, "Are you just going to leave this mess to me and Emingzu?" "First of all, this is not a mess. Right now, the seas are clear and the rivers are peaceful, the court is bright, and the Jing kingdom is developing vigorously. Based on the current situation, it will still develop vigorously for many more years." Li Yi looked at him and shook his head. "Second of all, although we are both surnamed Li, this world belongs to the Li family, not the Li family. I don't owe the royal family anything. Do you want me to waste my life in Jingdo and work for the royal family for the rest of my life? You don't owe us the royal family? How do you have the cheek to say that?" Li Xian stared at him angrily and said, "You left and took away the people of Yongning and Mingzhu's heart, and now you want to take away Shaning. The three most important princesses of the royal family have been taken away by you. You dare say you don't owe us the royal family?" Li Yi suddenly did not know how to refute. He thought for a long time and said, "I've already repaid what I owed the royal family. I gave the royal family a prosperous and stable time. It's not too much to abduct three princesses, right?" Li Xian looked at him and said seriously, "We have known each other for so long. Can you, even if it's just once, can you have a little bit of face?" Li Yi narrowed his eyes and looked at him. "Let me tell you, although we are very familiar with each other, although you are the emperor, if you continue to make personal attacks like this, I will still hit you." Li Xian looked at him and shook his head. "Touch your conscience. Can you still say what you just said?" Li Yi put his hand on his chest and said, "Even if I touch my conscience, I will still take Yongning with me. If Shaning wants to leave, I will still take her with me. Emingzu, wait for me to come back." "What about me?" Li Xian looked at him and said expectantly, "Why don't you take me with you as well?" Li Yi. He could take away the princesses, but taking away the emperor, Li Yi didn't plan to do so for now. 3 requests. Li Xian looked at him and said, "I have 3 requests. First, every month. At least write a letter to me every month. Don't be half-hearted. Each letter must have at least 5,000 words. Don't make up the number of words. Second, Shuzhou. I will give Shuzhou to you. You are the Jiang of Silla, so a prince should have a fief. That place is your fief. I will transfer the provincial governor of Shuzhou back. From now on, all the affairs of Shuzhou will be handed over to you. You can do whatever you want. But you must remember, you are the Jiang of Silla. You are the Jiang of Silla of the Jing kingdom. You have the kingdom and me behind you. Whenever I want to find you, I can find you in Suzhou. Third, if you encounter anything interesting, don't forget me. Only these 3 requests. Li Xian looked at him and said, as long as you agree to my 3 requests, you can take away Yongning, Shaning, and if Emingzu is willing, you can even take her with you. Li looked at him and thought for a while. Then he nodded and said, I promise you. Li Xian shook his head and said, words are no proof. Li Yi raised 3 fingers and said, I swear. I'd rather believe that there are ghosts in the world than believe a man's mouth. I don't believe your oath. Li Xian shook his head firmly and took out a piece of paper from his bosom. He also took out the ink and said, these are the 3 requests I just wrote. You can sign them. Li took it and looked at it. He didn't expect Li Xian to be smart this time. He looked at him and asked, can I not sign them? Can you trust me for once? Li Xian shook his head even more firmly. Li Yi picked up the pen and used his thumb to press on the ink. If he wanted to sign them, then sign them. Once he left the capital, he would be like a fish swimming in the sea and a bird flying in the sky. How could a man be bound by a piece of paper? Do you think that a man can't be bound by a piece of paper? Li Xian put away the paper that he had signed and said, if you violate any of these, I will have the local authorities put up notices like, Jiang of Silla Li Yi is a bastard who doesn't keep his word, everywhere in the Jing Kingdom. I want all the people to know what happens to people who don't keep their word. We're all friends. There's no need to be so cruel, is there? There's no use to you. Li Xian looked at him, stood up, and strode out of the room. In the courtyard, Shaning was surrounded by women. Third Miss Chen looked at her red and swollen eyes and said with some heartache, I'll go get 2 eggs and put them on. Yongning held her hand and comforted her in a low voice. Don't cry, royal sister. I'll beg brother to take you with him. Shaning hugged her and said, in the future, when I'm not by your side, you have to be good and remember to eat on time. Don't eat too much sweets, or else you'll have toothaches. You have to get used to sleeping alone. Yongning nodded obediently and said, royal sister, I know. I'll be good. Li Duan ran around the courtyard alone. Shaning walked over and picked him up. She whispered, Dwainer, we're going to leave soon. You have to grow up quickly. The next time we meet, I'll bring you to play a lot of fun things. Xiaonyang play. Li Duan looked at her and grinned. Chapter 993. The 5th year of Jinghe, the 3rd day of May. In 2 days it would be the Dragon Boat Festival. In the Jing Kingdom, although the Dragon Boat Festival was not as grand as the New Year Festival, the Lantern Festival, or the Mid-Autumn Festival, it was still one of the most important festivals. On the 5th day of May, people would eat rice dumplings, hang mugwort and calamus in front of their houses, and drink realgar wine. These were all the customs of the Jing Kingdom. On every important festival, the court would allow officials to rest for at least half a day. Most people would also choose to put down their work and relax. At this time, the brothel was a good place for them to go. Every year around the Dragon Boat Festival, the most popular play in the brothel was The Legend of the White Snake. On the day of the Dragon Boat Festival, the White Snake drank realgar wine and showed its true form. Su Xian was scared to death. The White Snake broke into the underworld and fought with the ghost, putting on a show of going to the underworld to save her husband. This play was suitable for the occasion, and was loved by the audience. However, when the people of the Jing Kingdom walked out of their houses early in the morning, and wanted to go to the brothel to watch the play, they were shocked to find that the brothel was gone. There was a notice at the entrance of the brothel. The door was closed, and many people were stopped outside. Why did it close all of a sudden? I watched a few plays inside a few days ago. Why is it gone today? Strangely, the brothel on the next street closed. I walked half a street, but I didn't expect this one to be closed too. While people were talking, someone in the shop next to the brothel poked his head out and said, "It was closed yesterday. You don't know, right? More than half of the brothel in the Jing Kingdom is closed. It seems that they are moving somewhere. If you want to watch the play, you have to walk 2 more streets." After knowing this, many people couldn't help but sigh. In the past, when there were not many brothel in the Jing Kingdom, they didn't think this place was very good. Later, the number of brothel gradually increased, and the plays inside were getting better and better. In the past 2 years, they had already gotten used to it. Now that they returned to the days 2 years ago, they always felt that something was missing. After walking 2 streets to another street, they finally realized what was missing. More than half of the brothel was gone. Many shops on the street were also closed. No one knew whether they were closed or temporarily. It was as if the entire capital had become empty in one night. On the palace wall, a figure stood silently. No one knew how long he had been standing there. A palace maid came up from below and put a robe on the girl's shoulders. She advised, "His Highness has been gone for 2 days. The wind is strong here. Princess, it's better to go back earlier." Since the first day of the 5th month, the girl, who had been standing on the city wall for a long time, smiled and said, "Standing here, I can see the farthest. If he comes back one day, I will be able to see him from afar." She looked to the west again and turned back to ask, "How is the academy?" The palace maid nodded and said, "His Highness has already arranged everything for the princess." "But princess, where do we find the teachers and students of the academy?" She smiled and said, "Teacher gave me an academy, so of course I have to find my own teachers and students. Hall of Diligent Government." Li Xian pushed open the door of the hall and stretched. He rubbed his head, which was a little swollen from dealing with the memorials, and let out a long sigh of relief. Although he wanted to push all the government affairs to Emingzu and be a free and unfettered emperor, if Emingzu was too tired, that guy would definitely find him the next time he saw him. It was better to offend the king of hell than to offend the Jiang of Silla. This risk could not be taken. He left just like that. What a disloyal guy. Li Xian sighed. If he left, there would be no one around him to talk to. Suddenly he thought of something and his eyes lit up. Shinshu. It seemed that he had not seen this guy for a long time. When he walked out of the hall, a eunuch immediately came up to him and asked, "Your Majesty," Li Xian waved his hand and said, "Go to Prime Minister Shen's mansion." Not long after, in the Shen mansion of the capital, the gatekeeper scratched his head and asked in surprise, "Young master, are you sure you did not find the wrong person?" A young master looked at him and asked with a frown, "What do you mean?" The young master in front of him had an air of nobility. The gatekeeper did not dare to offend him and said with a smile, "Young master, there is no one called Shin Shu in our Shin mansion." The young master was startled and said angrily, "Nonsense. He clearly said that he is from your Shin mansion." The gatekeeper had a bitter expression on his face. When he saw someone coming out of the mansion, he immediately stepped forward and said, "Third young master, this young master said he was looking for someone called Shin Shu, but there really isn't anyone called Shin Shu in our mansion." The young man who walked out of the Shin mansion looked at the young master who was in a trance and asked, "Brother, how do you write the name of the person you are talking about?" "Shen is the Shen of your Shin mansion. Shu is the number of Shu." The young man cupped his hands in obeisance and said, "Brother, I'm afraid you've come to the wrong place. There are many people with the surname Shen in the capital, but in our Shen residence, there is no one called Shin Shu that you're looking for." "Really?" Li Xian asked uncertainly. The young man nodded and said, "Really?" The expressions of the young man and the gatekeeper did not seem to be fake. Li Xian's body shook. He and Shin Shu hit it off at first sight and they were friends. When he said that he was from the Shen mansion, he never doubted it and did not verify it. He never thought that even his identity was a lie. In the capital, there were only 2 people who could be called his friends. Now one had abandoned him and left, and the other one was actually a fake? Haha. A self-mocking smile appeared on his face. He did not want to stay here any longer, and turned to leave. "Wait a minute." A soft voice suddenly came from behind. Li Xian turned around and saw the woman called Shen Su walking out of the Shen mansion. Shen Shu once said that Shen Su was his sister. That day in the palace, Shen Su did say that Shen Shu was her brother. So they were all lying to him? "You come with me." Shen Su looked at him and walked to the side. Li Xian followed her and asked coldly, "There is no one called Shin Shu in your Shin mansion?" "No." Shen Su shook her head and said. A trace of anger appeared on Li Xian's face and he asked, "Then you said before." Shen Su suddenly looked back at him and asked, "Has anyone ever said that you are stupid?" Li Xian thought about it and said, "No." Li Yi only said that he was stupid, but stupid was not stupid. Shen Su looked at him and said, "You are not only stupid, but also blind. You." In this world, there was only one person who dared to point at his nose and scold him. As the ruler of a country, how could he allow a woman to insult him? Li Xian pointed at her, and was stunned. His entire body suddenly trembled and his expression changed. He looked at her in disbelief and stammered, You. Shen Su looked at him and said in the same low and magnetic voice, "That's right, I am my brother." Morning Dew Hall. Hold the sword firmly and maintain this position for a quarter of an hour. Emingzu held Shanning's hand and adjusted her standing position before walking back into the hall. A few officials of the court had been waiting for her for a long time. A middle-aged official cupped his hands and said, "Your Highness, the drought in the south." Emingzu waved her hand and said, "Regarding the drought in the south, the Minister of Books will first discuss the specific plan and then submit it." This? The middle-aged official was stunned. He raised his head and looked at her in confusion. It had always been that when the subordinates encountered a problem that they could not solve, they would submit it to Her Highness, and there would soon be a solution. This was the first time he had seen Her Highness fight a problem again. The salary that the court gives you is not for you to submit it whenever you encounter a problem. Emingzu looked at him and said, "You are the pillars of the court. It is up to you to deal with the affairs of the country. If you submit it whenever you encounter a problem, who will you submit it to when I am not around?" Not long after, a few officials walked out of the Morning Dew Hall dejectedly. Her Highness the Princess was half the owner of the court. Since His Majesty neglected the court, the affairs of the country would naturally be handed over to her. How could she not be around in the future? As an assistant princess, where else could she go if she was not in the palace? Chapter 994. It was the 5th year and 7th month of Jingha. After the powerful Jiang of Silla, who was deeply trusted by His Majesty, left the capital city, the pressure on the officials in the court decreased a lot, but the pressure on their bodies increased. Because Her Highness ordered that each department in the court could only submit one memorial a day. This meant that from now on, they could not submit all the problems they encountered. They had to solve most of the problems themselves. After discussion, the most difficult and important problems were left to the princess to decide. This was not a good thing for the officials in the court who were used to sitting back and enjoying the fruits of others' labor. Those who did not do anything immediately felt the pressure. The monthly performance evaluation determined whether their promotion would be smooth or not. Now that the Emingzu Academy had been officially opened, it meant that a large number of talents would enter the court in the future. Being in the court was like rowing a boat against the current. If they did not move forward, they would fall behind. However, comparatively speaking, their luck could be considered good. The guy who had just been demoted to Shuzhou to be the provincial governor of Shuzhou was really unlucky. Although he was demoted, Shuzhou was relatively remote, poor, rampant with bandits, and poor public security. But apart from these, he had no other shortcomings. After all, he was a provincial governor of a province. At least in the territory of Shuzhou, he was a steady leader. But this time, His Majesty made Shuzhou the fief of Jiang of Silla. The finance, military, and political affairs of Shuzhou were all handed over to His Majesty. The provincial governor, who had just arrived in Shuzhou, was summoned back urgently. Now he was idle at home without any appointment. Speaking of which, although all the princes in the court had fiefs, it was only in name. They could only enjoy part of the taxes of their fiefs. They had no right to participate in the management of the fiefs. Even the princes who were born in the royal family could not have fiefs, let alone those who were not. In terms of law and reason, His Majesty's action was against the rules. But when His Majesty announced this 2 months ago, few people in the court objected. First, Shuzhou was really a special place. It was remote and bordered the Qi Kingdom. The local bandits were a headache for the government. Poor mountains, unruly rivers, unruly people. A place that would only be a burden to the country, and would not be able to create any value for the country. So what if it was sealed? As long as they could send away that great deity, it wouldn't matter even if they had to send away another province. At the beginning of the 7th month, the wind was gentle and the sky was clear. When the officials walked out of the palace gate, the red sun was only halfway up in the sky. Although they were tired these days, their hearts were filled with passion and enthusiasm. The border was stable, and the court was harmonious. Now the Jing kingdom was truly free of internal and external troubles. This great land was still waiting for them to govern. On top of the palace wall, the girl who had been looking into the distance for the past 2 months stood there as usual. Your Highness, those ladies have all moved into the academy. Many of the nobles and officials in the capital are willing to send their daughters to the academy. We have also selected some intelligent and beautiful ladies from the commoners. Now there are more than 100 students in the academy. Everything is ready. The girl murmured. She retracted her gaze from afar and nodded. The academy will open tomorrow. In the hall of morning dew, the princess was drunk and dancing. The sword in her hand could not be seen clearly, only a white shadow. At the entrance of the hall, an old woman watched for a long time before turning to Changde and asking, Your Highness, how much longer do you have to take that step? Changde looked at the figure and said slowly, Once you have a clear thought, you will immediately enter the academy. If your heart is troubled, you will waste your life. The old woman glared at him. Speak human language. It depends on fate. In the hall of diligent government, Li Xian finished reading a memorial and looked at the thick stack of documents beside him. He picked up a long letter and read it several times. A yearning expression appeared on his face. After a while, he shook his head and cursed. You have no sense of loyalty. After cursing for a while, he picked up another memorial helplessly. The emperor of the Qi kingdom was seriously ill and could not attend the court. The crown prince was in charge of the country. More than half of the officials in the court supported the third prince, Zhao Yi. The court was in chaos. The Qi kingdom had no time to attend to other matters and had withdrawn its troops from the border. The Qi kingdom withdrew its troops. The Zhao kingdom could not support the emperor alone, and withdrew its troops the next day. Within half a year, dozens of rebellions occurred in the Wu kingdom. The court could not cope with them, and was in a stalemate with the rebels. In the Qi kingdom, in the East Palace, a furious young man swept all the memorials on the table to the ground and cursed. What do they want? The crown prince of Ai was personally appointed by imperial father. They don't recognize him. Why do they not recognize him? Do they want to rebel? A counselor immediately stepped forward and said, Your Highness, please calm down. The third prince has not reached the point where he can cover the sky with one hand. Many officials in the court are already fighting for your Highness. Fighting for? A cold smile appeared on the young man's face. He said, I will remember the names of those people one by one. The East Palace of Ai is not a place where they can come and go as they please. In King Feng's mansion, a young man was engrossed in copying a letter. Someone knocked on the door and walked in. After the young man put down his brush, he bowed and said, Your Highness, the crown prince seems to be a little anxious. In the past 2 days, many officials have been visited by him. It doesn't matter. Zhao Yi shook his head and did not continue the young man's words. Instead, he looked out of the window and murmured, Jiang of Silla. Li Xian, should I say that you are smart or stupid? He turned around and asked, Is there any news from Shu province? The man shook his head and said, I have sent people to keep a close eye on it. So far, there is still no news about Jiang of Silla. Zhao Yi looked out of the window and smiled. Brotherly, I believe that we will meet again. In a shop somewhere in the capital of the Qi kingdom, a burly man walked out of the shop and pointed at several workers. He said, These are all valuable goods. Be careful when carrying them. If they are broken, you can't afford to pay for them even if you sell yourself. After giving such advice, he ran back into the shop and said to a woman in a flattering manner, Miss, these are new goods from the capital. They were all reserved last month. The woman did not care about the goods at all. She looked at him and asked, Only goods? The burly man was stunned. Then he patted his head and said, I almost forgot. This is a letter from the Li brothers. After saying that, he took out a letter from his sleeve and handed it to her. The woman opened the letter, and the burly man immediately looked at it. The woman glanced at him and walked into the inner room with the letter. Lin Yong curled his lips and murmured, "It is just a letter. It is not something shameful. Do you have to?" In a state in the Wu Kingdom, a general rushed into the tent and said in a deep voice, "Your Highness, urgent news. The spiritual state that we have just conquered has been conquered by the imperial court. General Fan has been captured." A young woman in armor stood up and said in a deep voice, "Abandon the spiritual state for now and defend the Yen state. I will send General Zheng as reinforcements." After she made some arrangements, a one-eyed general in the tent stood up and said, "Don't worry, Your Highness. Now that many states are rebelling, the imperial court's forces are scattered. They will focus on defense and will not take the initiative to attack." The woman pondered for a moment and said slowly, "Even so, we have to be careful." Not long after, she walked out of the tent and went to another tent. When she came to the entrance of the tent, she heard noises coming from inside. "I don't care. I don't care. I get headaches every time I read. I don't want to study anymore. I want to go out and play." It was a slightly immature voice. Another voice sounded old. At this moment, it said anxiously, "Your Highness, you can't do that. You will inherit the throne in the future. You can't lose your ambition in playing games. Do you know that Prince Jin of the Jing Kingdom is younger than you? He can already rule an academy by himself. He is already the pillar of the imperial court of the Jing Kingdom. You must learn from him." The young voice said stubbornly, "I don't care about Prince Jin. I want to play." The woman opened the tent curtain and walked in. With a dark face she said, "Young Fu." Seeing her come in, the young man in the tent changed his expression and hid behind an old man. "Your Highness, this old official greets you." The old man bowed to the woman. "Prime Minister, you don't have to be so polite." The woman hurriedly helped him up. She looked at the young man and said, "If he is disobedient, the Prime Minister can punish him severely. Don't spoil him every time. Blindly punishing him is not the right way. We should focus on persuading him. Moreover, Your Highness is still young. It's okay for you to play a little." The old man shook his head and said, "But now the Qi Kingdom has the third prince, and the Jing Kingdom is full of talents. Even a woman can take charge of the court, not to mention the young Prince Jin. Your Highness has been in the Jing Kingdom for a long time. You know this better than me." He sighed and said, "I'm just worried that the Wu Kingdom will have no successor." The woman lowered her head and said no more. The Jing Kingdom's royal family was full of talents. The eldest princess, as a woman, showed her great strategy of governing the country. Prince Jin was only 12 years old. When he was 10 years old, he was able to support the Academy of Mathematics. Their current emperor even established the Academy of Sciences, which greatly improved the people's livelihood. The Jing Kingdom's military strength also underwent earth-shaking changes, which deterred other countries. The most important thing was a familiar face appeared in her mind. Then, her face became a little gloomy. Seeing her like that, the young man lowered his head and walked out from behind the old man. He shook her arm and said, "Sister, don't be angry. I'll listen to the Prime Minister and study hard." The woman touched his head and said, "Go play if you want to play." "Thank you, sister." The young man said happily and ran out of the tent. The old man looked out of the tent and shook his head. He sighed and said, "God has not blessed the Wu Kingdom. We have suffered so many disasters. We have to expel the rebels and restore the country." Facing the woman, he slowly knelt down and said in a loud voice, "It's up to Your Highness." Yang Liuqing bent down and helped him up. There was a hint of determination on his face. He said, "Don't worry, Prime Minister. I'll definitely avenge my father and mother. I won't let the people of the Wu Kingdom continue to suffer like this." Shu Prefecture. As the most remote prefecture in the Jing Kingdom, the imperial court had always taken a laissez-faire attitude towards this place. Because Shu Prefecture was so remote and bordered by the three kingdoms, bandits were everywhere. 2 years ago, when the king of Shu was still alive, he plundered the people's wealth. The people of Shu Prefecture had a hard time living there. Now that the king of Shu was gone, another Jiang of Silla came, Jiang of Sila's mansion was already under construction. Although the people of Shu Prefecture didn't donate money for this, it seemed like he was not the same kind of person as the king of Shu. However, when the people heard about this Royal Highness Jiang of Silla for the first time, they still felt very uneasy. In the past 2 years, the number of bandits that came from the fringe to harm the people had decreased. The people of Shu Prefecture were finally living a good life. They didn't want to send away the wolves and tigers and leopards. Strangely enough, the merchants who passed by the fringe had different opinions about the situation in the fringe. Some said that the bandits were extremely vicious, committing all kinds of crimes such as burning, killing and pillaging. Some said that there were kind-hearted bandits. As long as one paid a certain fee, they would escort the merchants out of the fringe. It was no different from hiring a group of reliable guards. In terms of fees, it was even cheaper than hiring a real guard. And the way to tell if one was going to resist the bandits was to see if their leader had hair on his head. At this time, in an unknown mountain in the fringe, a bald man was excitedly rushing into a room with a piece of paper in his hand. He shouted, "Bookworm, bookworm, quick, His Highness has sent me a letter. Read it to me and see what His Highness has to say." "What's the hurry? What's the hurry?" A pale-faced, frail-looking young man glanced at him and took the letter. After reading it, he smiled and said, "His Highness said that they will be arriving at Shu Prefecture soon. He wants us to go over first." The burly man slapped his thigh and laughed heartily. "Since His Highness is coming, our brothers in the League will also be coming. This is great, those bastards. I'll go to their lair, and let those little bastards know who's protecting the fringe." When the burly man walked out of the room, a group of people immediately greeted him respectfully. "Greetings, big brother." When this group of people stood together with the burly man, it was as if the world around them had brightened up a little. The burly man waved his hand at the row of bald men in front of him and said, "His Highness is coming. Keep your spirits up and don't embarrass me." The group of people acknowledged and dispersed in all directions. It could be seen that this was a flattened hilltop. The area was large, and the ground was paved with bluestone slabs. The houses were arranged in picturesque disorder. Walking along a street to the front, one would find that there were shops, brothels, medical centers, restaurants. Everything that could be found outside could be found here. It was simply a shrunken city in the mountains. In the past 2 years, they had captured quite a number of people. When they had nothing to do, they would make them repair bridges, pave roads, and build houses. Now they had finally made some progress. When His Highness arrives, he should be satisfied. The burly man rubbed his shiny head and smiled. Dozens of miles away, someone's expression was extremely ugly. The man's face was gloomy as he asked, "What did those people say?" A young man raised his head and said, "They said that the other side has quite a number of experts and their strength is not to be underestimated. Unless their queen comes, even if both of us join forces, it will be difficult to gain the upper hand. They suggest that we don't act rashly." The man curled his lips in disdain. "What bullsh *t holy religion, it's just so. Your Highness, then we." The man waved his hand. "Let them run wild for a few more days." At the same time, on a mountain adjacent to this place, a man in purple walked into the room. He looked at the young man in the room and asked, "Lord Envoy, what did the Queen say?" "The situation over at the Qi Kingdom is not yet settled. The Queen has no time to attend to them for now." The young man waved his hand and said, "Let's not clash with them for now." The man in purple nodded and asked, "Then how should we explain this to that person? He's just a good-for-nothing. If it weren't for the fact that he might be of some use in the future, why would we have kept him alive until now?" The young man said casually. He got up and walked out of the door and out of the courtyard. In the open space in front of him, a man in yellow took a bite of a bun and frowned. He said, "Who steamed the buns today? Did they beat the salt cellar to death?" He spat a few times and casually threw the bun in a corner. When he turned his head, he noticed a pair of eyes looking at him. Guard. Guard. Sensing the coldness in that gaze, he shivered and quickly ran over. He swallowed the dusty bun and said with a trembling voice, "This bun, it's so delicious." The only teaching of the holy religion was to obey the Queen's orders. The holy religion also had an invisible teaching. Food must not be wasted, especially not in front of the guardian of the right. Disobeying the queen would only lead to death. Wasting food in front of the guardian of the right would be worse than death. The security of Shu province had improved slightly in the past 2 years. Although it was not the work of the government, the number of merchant caravans that were willing to pass through this place had increased. At this moment, a few horse carriages were slowly driving along the official road into the territory of Shu province. Chapter 995. The carriage stopped next to a tea house on the side of the road. The curtain of the carriage in the front was opened by a slender white hand, and a pretty little girl jumped out of the carriage. The driver jumped out of the carriage and said hurriedly, "Hey, slow down, little girl, don't fall. Brother, come down." The little girl landed steadily on the ground and turned back to wave at the carriage. The young man got out of the carriage, held her hand and said, "You've only learned martial arts for a few days, but you're already jumping up and down. If you learn for a few more years, you'll be like your sister Rui." "Same as me what?" A woman wearing a white tight suit and holding a long sword jumped out of the carriage and looked at him and asked. "Same, excellent." The young man said, pointed to the tea house in front, and said, "Go there and sit for a while, have a cup of tea, and then set off. If everything goes well, we'll arrive at Yong County today." A few more figures got out of the carriage behind. Li Yi walked over and explained to Rui and the others, "We've been on the road early in the morning. Let's go to the front and rest before we continue." It was a dusty journey from the capital to Shuzhou, and it took them 2 months to play all the way. In the following days they were really tired of sitting in the carriage. Whenever they had a chance, they would find a place to rest for a while. A middle-aged man came from behind and asked, "Li brothers, are you tired?" Li Yi smiled and said, "We've been on the road for a few hours, so I'm a little tired. Why don't we take a rest in the front, and I'll treat you guys to a cup of tea?" The middle-aged man smiled and said, "I'm also thirsty. Let's go." Then he waved to the people behind him and said, "Leave 2 people to look after the goods. The rest of you rest first. We'll take their place later." The middle-aged man in front of them was surnamed Wang, and he was in the business of escorting goods. They had met him on the road 2 days ago. When they were still 2 days away from Shuzhou, Li Yi asked Lu Meng to escort the caravan and the other members of the caravan to Shuzhou first. His family, on the other hand, traveled lightly and unhurriedly. Who knew that he would encounter a group of more than 10 bandits that morning? Although he could deal with these people by himself, he happened to meet this brother Wang, who saw injustice and pulled out his sword to help. Before he could do anything, he had already chased those people away. After chatting for a while, they learned that they were also going to Yong County, so they traveled together. Of course, more of the reason was that Brother Wang was worried about them traveling alone. Since he had good intentions, Li Yi couldn't refuse, so it was not appropriate for him to do it. Of course of it. The middle-aged man patted him on the shoulder and said, "If you ask me, Li brothers are really brave. You dare to go out with your family, without any guards. Shuzhou is a messy place, so be careful. Don't do this again." Of course, Li Yi couldn't say that the guards they brought with them were enough to rush into the palace of any country, kill them all, and take down the emperor. Otherwise, he would have to endure his incessant lecture. There weren't many people in the tea house. Rui and the other women sat in the innermost room, while Li Yi Feng, the sloppy old man, and the others sat outside. Although it was called a tea house, it was actually a simple tea shed. The furnishings inside were neat, and the tables, chairs, and benches were also very clean. Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu took their own utensils from the carriage. Along the way, they carried things like cups, bowls, and chopsticks with them. Li Yi Feng and the sloppy old man weren't so particular. They sat together with the man surnamed Wang and chatted casually. After the man surnamed Wang drank a cup of tea, he opened his mouth and asked, "Li brothers, the capital is thousands of miles away from here. Why did you think of coming to Shuzhou when you came out to play?" Li Yi smiled and said, "It's just a random trip." The man surnamed Wang shook his head and said, "To be honest, these days, even for us escorts, we have to be on tenterhooks when we walk outside. Our heads are tied to the waists of our trousers, and if we're not careful, we'll lose them. You guys walked all the way from the capital, especially to Suzhou, and you're still safe and sound. It's really, really unbelievable. Li Yi looked at him and said in surprise, Is Suzhou really that chaotic? It's more than chaotic. The man surnamed Wang shook his head and said, When we go out to escort, we'll always encounter a few waves of bandits, big and small. If it weren't for the fact that these dozen brothers are pretty good at martial arts and have some fame in Suzhou, we definitely wouldn't be able to make a living here. Li Yi looked at him and asked, There are so many bandits, hasn't the imperial court dealt with them before? The man surnamed Wang shook his head and said, Li brothers, you don't know. It's not just bandits. Suzhou is remote, and the imperial court has completely let them go. The bandits who collude with bandits and block the road to rob might have relatives in the government. The entire Suzhou is rotten from the root. Speaking of the current situation in Suzhou, the man surnamed Wang was a little indignant. It should be because he had suffered a lot at the hands of the bandits in Suzhou in the past few years. He sighed and said, I heard that His Highness Jiang of Silla is coming to Suzhou. I hope that under his governance Suzhou will be better. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Brother Wang, have you also heard of Jiang of Silla? Why haven't I heard of him? The man surnamed Wang looked at him and said, A few days ago, I also went to the capital. I've long heard that His Highness Jiang of Silla and the current emperor are close friends. He is also a hero of his generation. He created Tian Fa, opened the school of mathematics, repelled the enemy, and did many good things for the benefit of the country and the people. What else? Li Yi looked at him and continued to ask. It's said that the Jing kingdom can't have such a good situation without His Highness Jiang of Silla. What else? Many people in Suzhou who have heard of His Highness Jiang of Silla are looking forward to his arrival. No matter what kind of person he is, it's better than the current situation with a prince. Anything else? The man surnamed Wang looked at him and said in surprise, What else? For example, that Jiang of Silla is handsome, elegant. His martial arts are matchless and he roams the martial world. The man surnamed Wang was startled and shook his head. That's not true. Li Yi also shook his head and said, The information you've gathered is still not complete. Let's not talk about this. The man surnamed Wang shook his head and said, I'm afraid we'll have to part ways today. If Li brothers continue forward, you must be more careful. It's best if you hire some guards to avoid danger. Feng had only been to Suzhou once. Hearing this, he asked in surprise, Are there really that many bandits in this place? Why did we only meet that one? The man surnamed Wang shook his head and said, Don't say that. Who hopes to meet bandits? Feng shook his head with some regret and said, Maybe we're unlucky. Before he finished speaking, the teacup on the table suddenly shook and ripples appeared on the tea. Not good. The man surnamed Wang's expression changed. He suddenly stood up from his seat and looked behind him. On the official road, a cloud of dust rose. Dozens of fierce-looking men with weapons in their hands jumped off their horses. The person in the lead quickly walked towards the tea house and pulled a chair over to block the door. He sat down in a grand manner and said loudly, This is a robbery. Men stand on the right, women stand on the left, and silver is placed in the middle. We only want money, not lives. Chapter 996. As someone who had been traveling for many years, he needed to avoid risks reasonably, and also ensure the safety of the goods. He needed to have exceptional judgment. When encountering bandits, whether they could fight them, how to fight them, what losses they would incur, and whether it was worth it, these were all things that he needed to decide immediately. After roughly estimating the number of bandits, the man surnamed Wang concluded that this group of bandits was not something they could afford to provoke. There were at least 50 of them, and it would be too much for the dozen or so people on his side to fight them. As for the Li brothers and his wives, they could not be counted on. He first signaled to the brothers beside him with his eyes, telling them not to act rashly. Then he looked at Li Yi and said, Li brothers, money is just a worldly possession. Losing money avoids disaster. Life is more important. Feng looked at the bandits outside, his eyes shining. He rubbed his hands together, as if he could not wait any longer. The man surnamed Wang hurriedly pressed down on his shoulder and said, Don't be rash. Although he knew that this brother surnamed Fong had some strength, he could not fight against 10 people alone. He was not a match for these bandits. The location of this tea house was the intersection of 3 official roads. Usually there was an endless stream of people coming and going. Many people would choose to have a cup of tea here and rest their feet, so there were quite a few customers in the tea house. They did not expect to encounter bandits while drinking tea by the side of the road. Everyone's expression changed greatly, and when they saw the ferocious looks of the group, they could only listen to his orders. The men stood on the right, and the women on the left. They took out silver and valuables and placed them on the table in the middle. In a moment, the tea house was immediately divided into 3 groups. One group was naturally the bandits blocking the door, the other group was the obedient customers, and the last group was Li Yi and the others who were sitting peacefully in the tea house drinking tea. After the man with the surname Wang and the others stood up, they realized that Li Yi and the others were still sitting there. Not only that, but the women inside were still whispering to each other. They did not even look in their direction, as if they did not care about these mountain bandits at all. "Brother Fong Li brothers," the man surnamed Wang said anxiously, and tried to pull Fong up. The bandit leader naturally noticed the 2 tables as well. He looked into the tea house and immediately stood up, his eyes widening. He didn't expect to meet so many rare beauties in this tea house. He quickly walked forward, but suddenly heard a pa-da sound beside his ear. The man surnamed Wang's expression changed. When he pulled Brother Fong up, he didn't pull him up. Instead, he accidentally swept the teacup off the table, smashing a cup as a signal. The bandit leader stopped in his tracks, walked over, and said angrily, "What, you still want to fight?" Fong sat on the stool, shook his head and said, "I didn't want to fight." When he saw this guy actually walking towards the second miss and the eldest miss, he really didn't want to make a move. "You still dare to talk back?" The bandit leader placed his broadsword on Fong's neck in a domineering manner and shouted, "Believe it or not, I will chop you into pieces." This voice was still very powerful, and many of the customers in the tea house immediately turned pale. A chill suddenly came from his neck, and Fong shivered. He looked at the bandit leader and said, "Stop it, it's cold." The bandit leader didn't get angry but laughed instead. The broadsword was on his neck, and he didn't want his head to fall to the ground, but to actually feel cold. Was this guy stupid? Fong squeezed the blade and said, "Take it away, it's really cold." His broadsword was grabbed by someone, and the bandit leader subconsciously wanted to pull it back, but found that no matter how much strength he used, the broadsword in the big man's hand didn't move at all. Fong gently pulled, and the broadsword was in his hand. While the bandit leader was still in a daze, he had already placed the broadsword on his neck. He looked at the bandit leader and asked, "Come feel for yourself, is it cold?" The bandit leader's face was pale, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He really wanted to say cold, too damn cold. His neck was cold, and his heart was even colder, but he was afraid that if he opened his mouth, this sharp broadsword would cut his throat. "Say something." Fong held the broadsword and casually swung it a few times, and said unhappily, "Is it cold or not?" A thin line of blood immediately appeared on the bandit leader's neck. "Cold, cold, it's really cold." The bandit leader's voice carried a sobbing tone, and because his throat moved, there were a few more bloodstains on his neck. The atmosphere was a little quiet, and then a little awkward. Seeing this scene, the man surnamed Wang doubted his own eyes. From his point of view, it was clear that this bandit had personally delivered the broadsword into Brother Fong's hands. Was he crazy? The people who had obediently handed over the silver and valuables were even more stunned, not understanding the situation. At this moment, a bandit suddenly rushed in from outside, and placed the broadsword on the neck of the old man sitting the furthest away, and said loudly, "Release my boss or else I'll. Or else you'll kill him?" Fong looked at the unkempt old man who had been captured, and said, "Then kill him. I'm not familiar with him anyways." The bandit looked at him, and said tremblingly, "You don't think that I won't dare? Are you going to do it or not?" Fong looked at him, and as if afraid that the bandit would go back on his word, he swung the broadsword in his hand a few more times, and a few more bloodstains appeared on the bandit leader's neck. The bandit clenched the broadsword, and said harshly, "You don't go too far." Just as he finished speaking, he suddenly felt that his hand was empty. When he looked again, the broadsword in his hand had already fallen into the old man's hand. "I said that I only seek wealth, not lives. You bandits, don't pay attention to that." The unkempt old man shook his head, and casually used the back of the broadsword to knock the bandit unconscious, and then he slit his neck, saying, "Also, this broadsword is really cold." Li Yi put down the teacup and said, "Stop playing around, quickly finish this. We still have to hurry on our way." The man surnamed Wang looked at him, and did not understand what he meant. Suddenly, he felt a gust of wind blow past him, and Brother Fong, who had been standing next to him just a moment ago, had disappeared. He only reacted when he heard clanging sounds from within the group of bandits, and hurriedly turned his head to look. At this moment, of the dozens of bandits, more than 10 had already fallen to the ground. Seeing Brother Fong charge into the crowd like a wild beast, rampaging through the group of bandits, and most of the people he knocked down falling to the ground, the man surnamed Wang completely gaped. A few bandits realized how terrifying this man was, and circled around him from afar, charging towards the women in the innermost area. The man surnamed Wang's expression changed, and just as he was about to stop them, he saw one of the women kick with the tip of her foot, and a long bench directly flew out, smashing into the bodies of those bandits, and sending them flying dozens of feet away. Li Yi stood up, and slightly turned his body. With 2 knife hand strikes he sent 2 charging bandits flying, and then kicked another 2. He turned his head and said to Fong, "If we delay any longer, we won't be able to reach Yong County tonight." "All right," Fong responded, and picked up a large broadsword. The remaining 10 or so bandits were stunned, and the weapons in their hands fell to the ground with clangs. His bare hands were already so terrifying, and with a broadsword, wouldn't that be asking for their lives? "Hero, spare us." The 10 or so bandits threw down their weapons, and knelt down with a thud. The man surnamed Wang looked at the tragic scene on the ground, and then looked at Brother Fong, the Li brothers, the women sitting inside, the old man sitting calmly at the table drinking tea, and the surrounding bandits wailing and begging for mercy. He stood there in a daze, thinking, just what kind of people did they save 2 days ago? Chapter 997. The Li brothers are really good at hiding their strength. When they set off again, the man surnamed Wang looked ashamed and said, 2 days ago, I was really showing off in front of an expert. I'm ashamed. Only now did he understand why the other party dared to walk in Shuzhou without a single guard. Just the Fong brothers alone were worth the whole escort agency. After all, in the face of dozens of mountain bandits, they could only put down their weapons and surrender. Not to mention, there was also the heroine who could make people tremble with fear with just one move, and the old man who was old but always made people tremble with fear. Even Brother Li himself was extremely skilled. No matter how one looked at it, such a combination did not look like ordinary people. Use more strength, don't be lazy. Hurry up, did you not eat? You, I'm talking about you. What are you looking at? If you look again, I'll dig your eyes out. The escort sat in the carriage, holding a straw rope in their hands as a whip. From time to time, they whipped the mountain bandits who were pushing the carriage. More mountain bandits followed behind, their hands tied together with a rope. The other end of the rope was tied to the carriage. After chatting for a while, Wang Chong finally couldn't help but ask, "What does the Li brothers' family do?" Like them, they are also mountain bandits. Mountain bandits. Wang Chong was stunned and shook his head. The Li brothers are joking again. I used to live in places like Qing and Prefecture and the capital, but these places are strictly controlled by the government, so it's not very good to live. Li Yi explained, I heard that there are many mountain bandits in Shuzhou, but the government doesn't care, so I plan to come here to develop. Wang Chong smiled. Of course, he didn't believe what he said. Not to mention the gentle appearance of the Li brothers. Those women didn't look like mountain bandits at all. He shook his head and didn't care. Then he asked, what are the Li brothers doing in Shuzhou? Are they really here to play? These days, no one believed the truth. Li Yi sighed and said, it's true that they are here to play. My family runs a small business. Shuzhou is a special place, not far from the Qi Kingdom and the Wu Kingdom. I want to come here to see if I can expand my business. Although there were many conflicts between the Qi Kingdom and the Jing Kingdom, it didn't affect the business exchanges between the two countries. Every year, many businessmen traveled between the two countries. When he first saw the Li brothers, he knew that they were not ordinary people. Wang Chang thought for a while and reminded him, there are many caravans traveling between the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom in Suzhou. Unfortunately, I have cooperated with two of them. Li brothers are new here, so you are not familiar with this place. If you are interested, I can introduce you to one or two of them. For you it's much safer and more convenient to join a caravan. Li Yi said politely, thank you, Brother Wang. You're welcome. Wang Chang shook his head and said, however, you can go to the Qi Kingdom, but it's better for the Li brothers not to go to the Wu Kingdom. Li Yi looked at him and asked in surprise, why? On a horse in front of them, Mississippi Lu slightly tilted her head. Wang Chang explained, the situation in the Wu Kingdom is different from that in the Qi Kingdom and the Jing Kingdom. Although they are not hostile to the businessmen of our Jing Kingdom, the Wu Kingdom is now rife with rebellions, and the country is in turmoil. No caravan is willing to take the risk to go to the Wu Kingdom. It's not worth it to lose your life for money. Li Yi smiled and said, I see. Thank you, Brother Wang. As for Suzhou, Li Yi had already made arrangements several years ago. Now, the brothels had been opened all over Suzhou, and the Ru family and had covered all 7 counties of Suzhou. A huge information and intelligence network had been established long ago, so he didn't need to introduce the situation in Suzhou too much. Although the business had just started, it was just a beginning. In the future, the business would be one of the directions of vigorous development. Of course, there were still many things to do before that. Suzhou was a remote place, and the people were poor. Yong County, where the provincial capital was located, was relatively rich, but not by much. Therefore, when the exquisite and luxurious carriages drove into the city gate, the people passing by all stopped to watch. Of course, there was another reason why they couldn't move their eyes away. Behind the last carriage, there was a long team. Dozens of people were tied with ropes, following behind the carriage. Some passers-by took a few glances, and immediately recognized them. They are the mountain bandits in the Black Tiger Ravine area. I recognize them. The one at the front is Scarface Lin. He is the leader of the biggest mountain bandits in the Black Tiger Ravine area. This Scarface Lin is the most insane. Half a year ago, my family's old sow, which was a few days away from giving birth, was ruined by him. How did they get caught? Which hero did this? I didn't expect that this group of people would also end up like this. It's so satisfying. But I heard that Scarface Lin is related to County Magistrate Zhang. Could it be? They originally planned to arrive at Yong County that night, but because of the mountain bandits, their journey was delayed. They rested for a night and arrived at Yong County at noon the next day. The mansion of Jiang of Silla was still under construction. When Li Yi set off from the capital, he sent a letter to them, saying that the incomplete mansion of Jiang of Silla could not be lived in, but the original mansion of the king of Shu had been renovated, so they could rest for a while. They had some grudges with the king of Shu before, and now they had to occupy his place, so they felt a little uneasy. But there were so many people in the family, so they needed a bigger place. They couldn't bring Rui and the others to stay in an inn. Before settling down, they had to deal with these mountain bandits first. The government office of Yong County was not far from the city gate. Led by Wang Chang, they soon arrived at the gate of the government office. The bailiff on duty at the gate was leaning against the wall and dozing off. Suddenly he felt his vision go black. He opened his eyes, looked up at the people opposite him, and frowned. You guys, what are you doing? Wang Chang walked up, cupped his hands, and said, Brother, we caught a few mountain bandits on the way. We didn't dare to deal with them privately, so we brought them to the government office. Mountain bandits? The bailiff asked impatiently, looked around and asked, Where are they? Come out, hurry up. An escort held a rope and pulled the dozens of people out from behind the carriage. The bailiff opened his eyes wide and looked at them, and immediately ran into the government office. When he ran into the door, he stopped, turned around, and said, You wait here, I'll go and ask the county magistrate. The county magistrate of Yong County was surnamed Zhang, and he had just taken office. He had to thank his predecessor for his promotion from the county magistrate to the county magistrate in just a few years. Some time ago, because of the burden of the king of Shu, the previous county magistrate of Yong County, who was also his predecessor, as an accomplice of the king of Shu, was escorted to the capital after the king of Shu fled. Now no one knew where he had been banished to. Therefore, as a county magistrate, he was naturally promoted to the top leader of Yong County, especially when the new provincial governor was transferred away, and there was no provincial governor in the state capital. He was the absolute ruler here. Speaking of which, he had to thank the king of Shu for refusing to accept gifts. As a county magistrate, he had personally visited the king of Shu several times, but had never met the king of Shu. Perhaps the king of Shu didn't care to recruit a county magistrate at that time. In short, Yong County was his territory now. At this moment he sat in the back hall, took a sip of tea, and said with a frown, "Recently, the waiter has become more and more immature. He hasn't been here for a whole month." A woman behind him, who was massaging his shoulders, said in a soft voice, "Master, you're wrong about the waiter. You know, it's hard to do business recently. There's a group of bald men who are robbing them, so they can't go home and can only come out to do some small work. I think they're having a hard time, but they definitely didn't forget to show filial piety to you." "That's not necessarily." County Magistrate Zhang put down the teacup and said, "Maybe after such a long time he's wild and bold, and has forgotten how he got to where he is today." As soon as he finished speaking, a bailiff ran in a panic and said loudly, "Master, bad news, Second Lin is here." Chapter 998. County Magistrate Zhang was startled by him. He looked at the runner and scolded, "Don't be so flustered. Why are you so flustered?" After the scolding he felt much better. It seemed that Lin Eru was reasonable. He didn't forget the one who dug the well when he was in trouble. Even though he was a bandit, he couldn't forget the one who took him on this road. He looked at the runner and raised his eyebrows. How many things did he bring this time? The runner shook his head and said, "I didn't bring them." "I didn't." County Magistrate Zhang suddenly pounded the table and said angrily, "Why didn't you bring him here?" "He was brought here by someone else," the runner said, then immediately shook his head and said, "He was caught by someone else." "What?" Hearing that, County Magistrate Zhang suddenly stood up from the chair. In the front hall of the county government, Wang Chang looked at Li Yi and asked, "Didn't Li brothers say that they still have friends in Shuzhou? Why don't I see them?" Li Yi looked outside and said, "They will be here in a moment." Although they had written a letter a long time ago, they didn't tell them when they would come to Shuzhou. However, Rui and the others had already gone there, so they would come soon. Outside the county government, dozens of bandits were tied together and kneeling on the ground. More than a dozen runners looked at these bandits, and then looked inside the hall with a strange expression. Lin Eru and his gang were already considered to be a large group of bandits in Shuzhou. It had to be said that these people were quite capable to be able to catch all the bandits in one fell swoop. But the problem was that Lin Eru was the county magistrate's brother-in-law, not to mention the chaotic land outside Shuzhou, where the government couldn't control. All the bandits who ran amok in Shuzhou had some background. It wasn't that the government didn't want to arrest them. If they were determined to suppress the bandits, none of the bandits would be able to escape. It was just that Shuzhou was too poor. The local officials could only rely on the meager salary of the imperial court to support their families. If they wanted to live a carefree life, they had to go through other irregular channels. The county magistrate didn't care about Scarface Lin because he was not only his brother-in-law, but also often gave him the stolen goods. If these people caught them, it was equivalent to cutting off the county magistrate's source of wealth. Blocking one's way to wealth was like killing one's parents. Would the county magistrate let go of the enemy who killed one's father? As Li Yi and Wang Chang chatted casually, a middle-aged man with a big belly walked out from the back hall. Wang Chang immediately walked over and bowed. "This commoner greets the county magistrate." County Magistrate Zhang looked at the bandits outside, then squinted at him and asked, Did you catch these bandits? Wang Chang nodded and said, My lord, we did. To maintain the security of Yong County, we not only rely on the county government, but also on every citizen of Yong County. You did a good job. County Magistrate Zhang nodded and said, You go first. I'll deal with these bandits. My lord, then we'll leave first. Wang Chang bowed and turned back saying, Li brothers, let's go. You're leaving? Li looked at the county magistrate in confusion and asked, Isn't there any reward? It was not easy to catch dozens of bandits. Even if they didn't have any credit, they had worked hard. The local government had to show some sincerity, but they only gave a verbal reward. This was unreasonable. County Magistrate Zhang looked at the young man who didn't salute to him just now and frowned. After chopping down his money tree, he still wanted a reward. It was already a great blessing that he wasn't thrown into prison. After this incident, Lin Er would have to change his appearance again and use a new bandit name, which was a little more troublesome. County Magistrate Zhang glared at the two nosy guys and ordered the yamen runners, Take these thieves away and deal with them later. Wait. Li looked at him and asked, May I ask how you're going to deal with these bandits? County Magistrate Zhang was already angry. Hearing this, his face immediately darkened and he said, Do I need you to tell me what to do? He suddenly waved his hand and said, Hurry up and take them away. After saying that, he walked to the back of the hall on his own. Wang Chang looked at Li Yi with a wry smile and said, Li brothers, let's go. Li looked at the back of the county magistrate and shook his head without saying anything. The last person who talked to him like this should have grass growing on his grave. But he really didn't have any interest in getting angry with a 7th-level official for such a trivial matter. He would let his subordinates keep an eye on this matter when he went back. Let's go. He shook his head and walked out of the county government with Wang Chang. At this time, in the back hall of the county government, County Magistrate Zhang looked at the man in front of him with a sullen face and said angrily, You useless thing. There were so many people, but you were still killed. The bandit leader said with a bitter face, Brother-in-law, you really can't blame me. It's just that they are too powerful. County Magistrate Zhang asked with a sullen face, Do you know who they are? They came to Shuzhou for business. The bandit leader immediately said, Brother-in-law, I think they are a big fat sheep, and there are several beautiful women among them. How about businessmen? County Magistrate Zhang raised his eyebrows and asked, Are you sure they are a big fat sheep? They can't get any fatter. The bandit leader nodded his head vigorously and said, Brother-in-law, you have to believe my eyes. I've seen those women before. Any one of the hairpins on their heads is worth at least 1,000 taels of silver. Last time I snatched one, but it was snatched away by those damned baldies. The bandit leader gritted his teeth and said, Brother-in-law, we can't let them go. A big fat sheep. County Magistrate Zhang's eyes flashed a few times and he nodded. We can't let them go for colluding with bandits. He looked out of the door and shouted, Guards! Immediately, a runner rushed in and bowed. What's the matter, Your Honor? County Magistrate Zhang said in a deep voice, Take people to catch those guys who colluded with bandits just now. At the gate of the county government, Wang Chang looked at Li Yi and said, Li brothers, we have to go on this trip for another 2 days. Let's talk when I get back to Yong County. Li Yi cupped his hands in return and said, Be careful on the way. Let's go. Wang Chang turned around and said to his brothers. Suddenly, a shout came from behind. Stop. He turned around and saw a dozen or so yamen runners rushing out of the county office and surrounding them. Wang Chang was stunned and said in surprise, Brother, this is... The leading runner waved his hand and said, Arrest all these guys who colluded with bandits. Colluding with bandits? Wang Chang's face changed and he said in shock, It's a misunderstanding. Brother, this is definitely a misunderstanding. We caught the bandits. How could we collude with bandits? You still want to quibble? The runner said sternly, Arrest them. Fong cracked his knuckles. The imperial court had granted Shuzhou to his son-in-law, so Shuzhou was their territory. How could he let others bully him in his own territory? Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and walked straight into the county government. Seeing that he was so sensible, The runners didn't stop him. They looked at Wang Chang and the others behind and said, "Arrest them." Two runners wanted to go forward and arrest Li Yi, but Fang glared at them. They immediately shivered and retreated. Just now they heard that this man could fight against 10 people alone. They didn't want to suffer such a loss. As long as they didn't run away, they would have time to deal with them later. In the hall of the county government, the county magistrate just now sat in the main seat. He hit the gavel and said loudly, "Lin Er, you said that you have accomplices?" The leader of the bandits knelt in the hall and turned around to point at Li Yi and Wang Chang, saying, "Your Honor, they are my accomplices." Hearing this, Wang Chang's face changed and he immediately said, "Your Honor, he is clearly framing us. If we are his accomplices, why did he arrest them?" The county magistrate also looked at the leader of the bandits angrily and asked, "He is right. If they are your accomplices, why did they arrest you?" "Your Honor, what I said is true." The leader of the bandits said with a serious face, "We were originally accomplices, but we fought because we couldn't divide the booty evenly. He wanted to exchange us for the reward." "Nonsense." Wang Chang pointed at him and said loudly, "This thief clearly wants to make a false countercharge. Your Honor, please understand." Silence. "It's hard for me to make a conclusion based on your side of the story." Holding the gavel in his hand, County Magistrate Zhang fiercely pounded the table and said, "I won't wrongly accuse any good person, nor will I let any bad person go. Guards, take them all away. I'll interrogate them carefully after I've investigated them thoroughly." Wang Chang hurriedly said, "Your Honor, I can prove my identity." "Shut up." The county magistrate looked at him, waved his hand and said, "Don't talk flowery words. Take them away first." Wang Chang stood where he was in a daze, and looked at the county magistrate in disbelief. They were escorts, and he had a lot of evidence to prove his identity. It was such a simple matter, but the county magistrate wanted to lock them up first without asking the right and wrong. If they were really locked up, wouldn't it be up to them to decide whether they were right or wrong? He looked at the bandits kneeling on the ground and looking at him with a sarcastic smile, and finally understood something. This was not a county government, it was clearly another den of bandits. This was collusion between officials and bandits. Bandits were officials, and officials were bandits. Li knew that there was a problem of collusion between officials and bandits in Shuzhou, which was also the first problem he planned to solve after coming here. However, he didn't expect that he would encounter such a thing as soon as he entered Yong County, and had no time to settle down. He was tired after a long journey. What he wanted to do most now was to find a big and soft bed and have a good sleep. These bastards, couldn't they make trouble later? They didn't let him rest at all. They were rushing to reincarnate. Chapter 999. Receiving the county magistrate's order, a group of government runners immediately walked toward Wang Chang and Li Yi. Wang Chang had no hope for the corrupt official, so he said in a deep voice, "Li brothers, it's not like yesterday. This is the government, the territory of the corrupt official. You must be calm and don't be impulsive. It's a big crime to attack the government." Fang stretched his wrists and shook his head, saying, "Brother Wang, you're wrong about one thing. Yesterday it was our territory, and today it's still our territory. You can be impulsive. If anything happens, I'll cover for you." Seeing the formation of the man in the court, County Magistrate Zhang's face darkened and he shouted, "Do you want to resist arrest?" The leader of the bandits, Lin Er, was secretly delighted. They openly resisted arrest and provoked the court. Now, no matter whether they were bandits or not, they couldn't escape the crime no matter what. When they were all in prison, he would torture them to death. Fang shook his head, looked at the county magistrate, and said, "You dog official, you can't distinguish right from wrong. You even colluded with the bandits. You're too bold." County Magistrate Zhang said with a sullen face, "Take them down first. If they dare to resist, execute them on the spot." He had heard from Lin Er that these people were all skilled and ordinary people were no match for them. Even if all 3 teams of bailiffs were added together, they wouldn't be able to outnumber Lin Er's gang of bandits. But there was a big difference between fighting the bandits and resisting the government. He really didn't believe that these people were really lawless to this extent. Two government runners walked in the direction of Fong. He clenched his fists, and one of them pulled out a knife from his waist and pointed it at him, saying loudly, "You've heard what our Lord said just now. I advise you to give up the fearless resistance and quickly surrender." Old Fong pinched the tip of his saber and gave it a gentle tug. The long saber flew out of the constable's hand. He pinched the tip of the knife and gently bent it. The tip of the knife was broken off just like that. He broke it a few more times, and the long saber was broken into pieces. He threw it on the ground, making a crisp sound. I have a stomachache. Hold on for a while, I need to go to the toilet." The constable suddenly clutched his stomach, cold sweat beading on his forehead. He bent over and ran away. County Magistrate Zhang's face was gloomy and he said angrily, "Trash, trash, what are you waiting for? Let's go together." Over a dozen government runners glanced at each other, abandoned Li Yi and Wang Chang, and rushed towards Fong. It was obvious that this man was the most ferocious opponent. If this terrifying man was dealt with first, the other two would not be a threat. Wang Chang's expression changed several times. Finally, he gritted his teeth and shouted, "Brother Fong, let me help you. This F***king world, I'm going to risk it all. Brothers, let's go. At worst, we'll go out to be mountain bandits. It's better than being killed by this dog official." Wang Chang still had some leadership and deterrence among those armed escorts. As soon as he said that, the government runners who had been holding those people suddenly felt their hands were loosened. They looked up and saw those people who had been restrained by them, just now looking at them fiercely. The whole county government suddenly fell into chaos. "Rebel, rebel, you are rebelling." County Magistrate Zhang's face had already turned pale. He shouted, "Go to the provincial governor's mansion to ask for reinforcements." One county government, 3 groups of government runners, plus some chores staff. There were no more than 100 people available. Although the number of people was far greater than these rebels, the opponents were all highly skilled in martial arts, especially that man, who was simply a beast in human form. More than half of the government runners were defeated by him. In the end, many government runners in the county government of Yong County were surrounded in a circle. They held their heads in their hands and squatted in the yard. County Magistrate Zhang's forehead was covered with cold sweat. He said in a trembling voice, You, do you know what you are doing?" Fong moved a chair over. Li Yi sat at the door of the main hall of the county government and said, "As the county magistrate of Yong County, do you know what you are doing by colluding with the government officials and framing innocent people?" County Magistrate Zhang put on a fierce face. He said, "You are rebelling against the imperial court and the government. I advise you to surrender immediately, or you will be sentenced to death." With a knife in his hand, Fong patted his face and said, "You talk too much. Do you know that the more you talk, the faster you will die? Believe it or not, I will cut off your tongue first." County Magistrate Zhang shrank his body subconsciously. Then he felt that it was a little undignified in public. He raised his head and said, "I am an official appointed by the Imperial Court, the county magistrate of Yong County." Old Fong looked at him and said angrily, "What are you yelling for? What are you yelling for? You're not an official of the Imperial Court anymore. If you say another word, I'll cut your tongue out first." As expected, County Magistrate Zhang stopped talking. Compared with his tongue, it was obvious that the latter was more important. After the fight just now, Wang Chang's forehead was covered with sweat, but the expression on his face was quite excited. In his life, he had always followed the rules and never dared to go beyond the rules. He had never been as hardy as he was today. After the excitement, he quickly calmed down. He looked at Li Yi and immediately said, "Li brothers, we can't stay here for long. We have to leave immediately. The news that we attacked the government office must have been spread out. If the guards are attracted, we won't be able to leave." "Brother Wang, didn't you say that His Highness Jiang of Silla would be here soon?" Li Yi smiled and said, "His Highness Jiang of Silla is handsome and unrestrained, and his kung fu is unparalleled. He can distinguish right from wrong. It was too shameless to praise himself." Li Yi coughed a few times and said, "Anyway, You have to believe that His Highness Jiang of Silla will definitely give us justice. Wang Chang was stunned and immediately said, "But we don't know where His Highness Jiang of Silla is now." Before he finished his words, the ground under his feet suddenly shook. At the same time, outside the county office, the people all opened their mouths in surprise when they saw hundreds of armored guards surrounding the county office. When a group of soldiers ran into the county office in neat steps, Wang Chang's face turned completely pale. Your Excellency, help me." Seeing the people coming, County Magistrate Zhang directly rolled down from the court. He knelt in front of a man, pointed to the back and said, "These bandits are lawless. They attacked the government office and intended to murder an official of the imperial court. Your Excellency, please take them down." Although the provincial governor of Shuzhou had been transferred away by the imperial court, the assistant officer of the provincial governor's mansion was still there. During this period, the affairs of Shuzhou had been handled by the chief of staff. Therefore, when County Magistrate Zhang saw the chief of staff and the commander-in-chief coming in with the guards, he felt as if he had seen his savior. At this point, the reason why those people attacked the government office was no longer important. What they had committed was treason, and the only way out was death. Wang Chang's body trembled as he watched the soldiers quickly walk over after hearing the words of the young county magistrate. He almost fell to the ground. At this time, two people had already come to them. A scribe on the left quickly tidied up his clothes, bowed and said, "The chief of staff of Shuzhou pays my respect to His Highness Jiang of Silla." A man in armor on the right simply knelt down on one knee and said loudly, "The chief of staff of Shuzhou pays my respect to His Highness Jiang of Silla." In the county office, all the soldiers put down their weapons, knelt down on both knees and said in unison, "We pay our respect to His Highness Jiang of Silla." Wang Chang was stunned and looked back. Where was His Highness Jiang of Silla? Jiang of Silla? Behind him, there was no one in the hall. Then he slowly turned his head and looked at the Li brothers, whom he had just known for 2 days and had experienced a lot. Plop! Finally, his legs gave way and he knelt down on the ground. Plop! There was another heavy sound. County Magistrate Zhang had already stood up and turned around to see the chief of staff and the commander-in-chief take down those rebels, but he saw such a scene. The chief of staff bowed, and the commander-in-chief knelt down. His Highness Jiang of Silla. Looking at the young man opposite him, he only felt that the clear sky above his head suddenly became gloomy. Dark clouds rolled up, and thunder exploded. He knelt down again. There was a buzzing in his ears and his mind was blank. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.